The apron hit Victoria's chest with enough force to make her stumble backward, the cheap cotton fabric sliding down her black Dior dress like an insult made tangible. "If you need money so badly," Diane Blackwood said, her ice blue eyes glittering with malice, "you can work as our maid. It's what you really are, isn't it?" The library erupted in laughter. Cousins, distant relatives, business associates, all of them watching Victoria Laurent stand in the center of Richard Blackwood's ornate library, holding a maid's apron while wearing widow's weeds that cost more than most of their monthly salaries. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Victoria herself. She looked down at the apron, her fingers trembling as they gripped the starched fabric. The storm outside Blackwood Manor matched the one building in her chest, thunder rolling across the Connecticut hills, rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, lightning illuminating the faces of people who had never wanted her here, people who had spent the last 6 months waiting for this moment. "Miss Laurent," Harold Chen said, his voice apologetic as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. The attorney looked as uncomfortable as Victoria felt, his rumpled suit and coffee-stained tie marking him as an outsider in this world of old money and older grudges. "Perhaps we should continue with the reading of the will." "There's no need," Marcus Blackwood interrupted, rising from his leather wingback chair. At 32, Richard's son had his father's pale blue eyes and weak jawline, softened further by privilege and the beginning of a gut that expensive suits couldn't quite hide. He crossed to the mahogany desk where Harold had spread out the documents, his hand landing possessively on a folder Victoria hadn't seen before. "My father's attorney, his real attorney, prepared a revised will 3 months before his death." Victoria's heart stopped. "What?" "This woman," Marcus continued, gesturing at Victoria with barely concealed contempt, "married my father when he was dying. 68 years old, ravaged by cancer, barely coherent half the time, and somehow she convinced him to marry her." He picked up the folder, waving it like evidence in a trial. "But my father wasn't completely senile. He knew a gold digger when he saw one." "That's not true," Victoria whispered, but her voice was drowned out by the thunder outside and the murmurs of agreement rippling through the crowd. Diane moved to stand beside her brother, her platinum blonde bob razor-sharp in the lamplight, her designer suit perfectly tailored to her willowy frame. At 28, she had perfected the art of looking down at people despite being only 5'9" in her Louboutin. "Our father left explicit instructions. This woman gets nothing. Not the house, not the money, not even the car she drove here." Harold stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. "Now wait just a minute. I have the legally executed will right here, dated and witnessed according to the law that applies to lucid individuals," Marcus cut in. "My father's medical records show he was on heavy pain medication, morphine specifically. His mental capacity was compromised. Any will signed in that state can be contested, and we will contest it." He smiled, and it was his father's smile, thin-lipped and cruel. "Unless, of course, Victoria would like to save us all the trouble and walk away now." Victoria felt the walls closing in. She had known this was coming, had felt it in the cold shoulders at Richard's funeral, in the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, in the way Marcus and Diane had looked at her across their father's grave. But knowing and experiencing were two different things. "I was his wife," she said, forcing steel into her voice even as her hands shook. "I cared for him. I was there when none of you could be bothered." "You were his nurse," Diane corrected, her red nails drumming against her crossed arms. "A nurse we hired to care for him in his final months. You saw an opportunity and you took it. How much did you think you'd get? 10 million? 20? I didn't marry him for money." "Then why did you marry him?" Marcus demanded. "Love, please. He was 40 years older than you, dying, and, let's be honest, you're not exactly the type of woman who ends up with men like my father unless there's a financial transaction involved." The racism wasn't even subtle anymore. Victoria saw it in their faces, heard it in the emphasis Marcus placed on certain words. She'd dealt with it before. The assumptions, the stereotypes, the casual cruelty of people who thought their money gave them permission to treat others as less than human. But standing here, in the home of a man who had promised to protect her, surrounded by his family who wanted nothing more than to destroy her, the weight of it was crushing. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. She knew who it was without looking. The same person who had been calling her for the last hour, whose messages she'd been ignoring because she'd promised herself she could handle this alone, that she didn't need rescuing, that she was strong enough to face Richard's children and their vitriol without running to the man who had promised to burn down the world for her. Nothing to say? Diane pressed, moving closer. She was tall enough to look down at Victoria, and she used every inch of that height advantage. No defense, no proof that you actually cared about our father? Victoria's throat tightened. How could she explain? How could she tell these people that their father had offered her something more valuable than money, protection, that 2 years ago, when she'd found herself pregnant and terrified, caught between 2 powerful men whose war would have crushed her and her unborn child, Richard Blackwood had extended a lifeline she'd been desperate enough to grab? She couldn't tell them that. Couldn't tell them about the baby, about the real father, about the deal she'd made with their dying patriarch. Some secrets were meant to stay buried, especially when the truth would only make things worse. I loved him, she said quietly, because it was partially true. Not romantic love, never that, but she had cared for Richard in his final months, had held his hand through the pain, had read to him when he couldn't sleep, had been there when his own children were too busy with their lives to watch him fade. Love, Marcus repeated, his laugh harsh. Right. Well, your love is worth exactly nothing. Sign this. He pulled a document from the folder, sliding it across the desk toward her. Acknowledge that you married my father under false pretenses, renounce any claim to his estate, and will give you $50,000 to disappear. Victoria stared at the paper, her vision blurring. $50,000. It was more money than she'd ever had in her bank account, more than she'd made in 2 years of nursing. To them, it was nothing, a rounding error in their father's vast fortune. To her, it was an insult wrapped in legal language. And if I don't sign, then we drag you through court, Diane said pleasantly. We'll subpoena every aspect of your life, where you came from, who you are, what you did before you started working for our father. We'll examine every conversation, every moment you spent with him, and we'll prove what we already know, that you manipulated a dying man for financial gain. The threat was clear. They would dig into her past, into the life she'd carefully reconstructed after leaving everything behind. They would find things she'd buried, secrets she'd protected, connections that needed to stay hidden. And if they dug deep enough, they might find the one thing that would destroy not just her, but the innocent child she'd spent 2 years protecting. Her phone buzzed again, insistent, demanding. I need a moment, Victoria said, her voice barely audible over the storm. There's nothing to think about, Marcus said. Sign, or we'll... The library doors exploded inward with enough force to crack the frame. The sound was deafening, wood splintering, the crash of doors slamming against walls, a rush of wind and rain as the storm invaded the carefully controlled space. Every head turned toward the entrance, and Victoria's heart stopped completely. He stood in the doorway like an avenging angel cast in shadows and fury, backlit by lightning that turned his silhouette into something otherworldly. Rain dripped from his jet-black hair, plastering it to his skull in a way that only emphasized the sharp angles of his face. His suit, custom-tailored, all black, probably worth more than the car Marcus was so proud of, was soaked through, clinging to his lean, dangerous frame. Minjun Kang didn't walk into the room so much as he claimed it, each step deliberate and lethal. Water pooled on the hardwood beneath his Italian leather shoes, and no one, not Marcus with his bluster, not Diane with her Ice Queen facade, not any of the relatives who'd been so eager to watch Victoria's humiliation, said a word. Victoria couldn't breathe. She'd told him not to come, had sent him message after message insisting she could handle this alone, that she didn't need him to intervene, that his presence would only complicate an already impossible situation. But Minjun had never been good at taking orders, especially not when they involved her safety. His eyes, dark brown, almost black, capable of warmth she'd seen only in private moments, were absolutely glacial as they swept the room. They cataloged every face, every person, marking them with the kind of attention that made survival instincts scream. This was a man who remembered slights, who kept ledgers of debts owed, who never forgot and never forgave. When his gaze finally landed on Victoria, standing in the center of the room with a maid's apron clutched in her hands, something shifted in his expression. The cold fury remained, but underneath it, she saw the thing that terrified her more than anything, the barely leashed violence of a man who would kill for her without hesitation. "Take," he said, his voice low and deliberate, each word enunciated with the precision of someone for whom English was a second language, but whose command of it was absolute. "Your hands off my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Diane's perfectly composed mask cracked, her ice-blue eyes widening in genuine shock. Harold Chen slowly removed his glasses, cleaning them with shaking hands, as if that might change what he was seeing. The relatives who'd been so eager to watch Victoria's downfall suddenly found the floor, the walls, the storm outside infinitely more interesting than the man who just claimed ownership of the woman they'd been humiliating. Victoria wanted to speak, to say something that would diffuse the situation, but her throat had closed completely. Minjun was here, in Blackwood Manor, in front of all these people. Every carefully constructed wall she'd built between her old life and her new one was crumbling, and she could do nothing but watch. "Your wife?" Marcus finally managed, his voice cracking on the second word. Minjun didn't answer immediately. He crossed the remaining distance to Victoria with movements that were almost casual, if you didn't notice the coiled tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed as if imagining themselves around someone's throat. When he reached her, he took the apron from her trembling fingers, with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the fury radiating from him. He looked at the apron for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned to face Diane. "You threw this at her," he said. It wasn't a question. Diane took an involuntary step backward, her red nails digging into her crossed arms. We were just..." "You threw this," Minjun repeated, his voice dropping even lower. "At my wife." He let the apron fall to the floor between them. And somehow that simple action carried more threat than any weapon. The fabric landed with barely a sound, but it might as well have been a gauntlet thrown, a declaration of war. "Mr. Kang," Harold Chen said, stepping forward with the desperate courage of a man trying to prevent a massacre. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Harold Chen, attorney for the Blackwood estate. Perhaps we could all take a moment to..." "I know who you are," Minjun said without looking at him. His attention remained fixed on Marcus and Diane, and Victoria knew that look, had seen it before, in the early days of their relationship, when he was still teaching her that the quiet ones were always the most dangerous. "I know who everyone in this room is, their names, their finances, their secrets." His lips curved into something that might have been a smile on anyone else, but on him looked like a promise of violence. "I make it my business to know the people who matter to my wife." "This is insane," Marcus said, finding his courage now that the initial shock had worn off. "Victoria was married to my father 6 months ago. She couldn't possibly be..." "Married to me?" Minjun finished. "We've been married for 18 months. Your father knew. He approved." He reached into his jacket slowly, because everyone in the room had tensed at the movement, and withdrew a folded document. Legal marriage certificate, filed in New York, predating his death by a considerable margin. He handed the document to Harold, who unfolded it with shaking hands. Victoria watched the attorney's face go pale as he read, his eyes scanning the official seals, the signatures, the dates that proved everything Minjun said was true. But she was married to my father," Diane said, her voice losing its confidence. "She was Mrs. Blackwood. She wore his ring. She honored an agreement," Minjun interrupted, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. "An agreement between your father and myself. He needed a wife for appearances. Victoria needed protection. I permitted it because Richard Blackwood was a dying man, and I am not in the business of denying final wishes." His eyes, when they finally left the siblings to return to Victoria, softened almost imperceptibly. "But make no mistake about who she belongs to." The possessiveness in those words should have irritated Victoria. should have made her bristle at being discussed like property, like something to be claimed and owned. But she'd long ago accepted that Minjun's possessiveness came from a place of protection, not domination. In his world, claiming her publicly meant marking her as untouchable. It meant that anyone who hurt her would answer to him, and in the circles he moved in, that was a death sentence. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, but his bluster was weakening. "Even if you are married to her, that doesn't change the fact that she married my father under false pretenses. She was already married to you. That makes her marriage to him null and void, which means she has no claim to his estate anyway." "Actually," Harold said quietly, still staring at the marriage certificate, "if Mr. Blackwood knew about the existing marriage and proceeded anyway, it suggests the marriage to Victoria was symbolic. Possibly for legal protection purposes." He looked up at Minjun, and Victoria saw the realization dawning in his eyes. "You were protecting her from something." "Someone," Minjun corrected. "Who?" Diane demanded. "Who were you protecting her from?" Minjun's silence was answer enough. There were some questions that didn't need answering, some truths that were more dangerous spoken aloud. Victoria knew he would never tell them about the real threats, about the men who'd wanted to use her, about the circumstances that had forced her into Richard Blackwood's protection, about the child whose existence was still a secret that could destroy everything. "It doesn't matter," Marcus said, rallying. "Regardless of why or how, the fact remains that Victoria has no legal claim to my father's estate. Any provisions he made for her are void. She married him fraudulently, which means, Minjun said, cutting him off with surgical precision, that you've spent the last 20 minutes humiliating a woman under false assumptions. You threw an apron at her, called her a gold digger, threatened to destroy her life." He took a step toward Marcus, and the younger man actually stumbled backward. "You did this in front of witnesses, in your father's home, while she was grieving." "Grieving?" Diane scoffed, trying to regain some ground. "Please, she didn't love our father. This whole thing was a sham from the beginning." "Your father," Victoria said, finding her voice at last, "offered me kindness when I needed it most. He gave me shelter, protection, and respect. I sat with him every day of his final months. I read to him, I held his hand. I was there when he took his last breath." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "While you were filing paperwork to contest his will, while you were meeting with lawyers to find ways to cut me out, I was there." The accusation hung in the air, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Diane had the grace to look ashamed. Not enough to apologize, but enough to look away. "The will," Harold said, clearing his throat, "actually specifies—" A phone rang, cutting him off. Not Victoria's this time, but Minjun's. He answered it without taking his eyes off the Blackwood siblings, listened for 3 seconds, and disconnected. When he looked at Victoria, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Fear. Not for himself. She'd never seen Minjun afraid for himself, but for her. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Now." "What? Why?" "Victoria." His hand found hers, his fingers interlacing with hers in a grip that was gentle but unyielding. "We need to leave. Now." The urgency in his voice, the way his eyes kept darting to the windows, the slight tension in his shoulders. These were tells she'd learned to read over the last 2 years. Something was wrong. Something was coming. "I'm not done here," she said, even though every instinct was screaming at her to trust him, to run. "They need to understand. They need to survive," Minjun said flatly. "And if we don't leave in the next 60 seconds, that becomes significantly less likely." Marcus laughed, a shrill, nervous sound. "Is that a threat? Are you threatening us?" Minjun looked at him with something approaching pity. "No, I'm trying to save your life." He turned back to Victoria. "Someone knows you're here. Someone who's been waiting for this opportunity." The words sent ice through her veins. "No, I was careful. I made sure." "I know, but they found you anyway." His thumb stroked across her knuckles, a gesture of comfort that contrasted sharply with the urgency in his voice. "Please, Victoria, trust me." She did. God help her, she did. Even though it meant walking away from this confrontation unfinished, even though it meant leaving Richard's children with their assumptions and their cruelty, even though it meant exposing more of her secrets than she'd ever intended. "Okay," she whispered. Min Jun's relief was visible for half a second before his professional mask returned. He turned to Harold. "The will. What were you about to say?" Harold glanced nervously between Min Jun and the Blackwood siblings. "Mr. Blackwood's will includes, there's a provision for a child." Victoria's world stopped. "What child?" Diane demanded. "The document specifies a trust fund for any child of Victoria Laurent born within the bounds of our union." Harold's hands shook as he held up the papers. "He left $5 million for—" Gunfire erupted outside. The sound was unmistakable. Sharp cracks that cut through the storm, followed by the crash of breaking glass somewhere in the house. Screams erupted from the relatives in the library, people diving behind furniture. Marcus dropping to the floor with a speed that would have been comical in any other circumstances. Min Jun moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd been in combat situations before. He pulled Victoria behind him, his body becoming a shield, his other hand reaching inside his jacket for a weapon she'd always known he carried, but had never actually seen him draw. "Down," he ordered, his voice cutting through the panic. "Everyone down, away from the windows." More gunfire, closer now. The sound of boots on hardwood, multiple men entering the house. Diane was sobbing, curled into a ball behind her father's desk. Marcus had pressed himself against the wall, his face pale with terror. Harold had overturned his chair and was crouching behind it, as if the thin wood might offer protection. "How many?" Victoria whispered, her hands gripping the back of Min Jun's jacket. "6, maybe 8. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Professional. They knew exactly when to hit, exactly where you'd be." "Who? Later." He was scanning the room, calculating angles, exits, threats. "Can you run in those shoes?" Victoria looked down at her black heels. Practical by funeral standards, but not exactly designed for fleeing armed attackers. "I can try." "Good enough." He pointed to a door on the far side of the library, half hidden behind floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "Service entrance. Leads to the kitchen, then outside. When I move, you move. Don't stop. Don't look back. Get to the car." "What about you?" His smile was sharp and dangerous. "I'll be right behind you." "Min Jun, I didn't survive this long by being reckless," he said, squeezing her hand once before releasing it. "Trust me." The library door exploded inward for the second time that night, but this time it wasn't Min Jun making a dramatic entrance. 3 men in tactical gear burst through, weapons raised, their faces covered by black masks. They moved with military precision, fanning out to cover the room. "Nobody move!" one of them shouted in accented English. Russian, Victoria thought, though she couldn't be sure over the roar of her own heartbeat. Min Jun moved. Min Jun's movements were liquid death. He closed the distance to the first gunman before the man could fully process the threat, his hands striking with surgical precision at the wrist holding the weapon. The gun clattered to the floor, and Min Jun's follow-up strike, a brutal elbow to the throat, dropped the man like a puppet with cut strings. The second gunman swung his weapon toward Min Jun, but Victoria's husband was already moving, using the first man's body as a shield. Bullets tore into the fallen attacker instead of their intended target, and Min Jun was on the shooter before he could adjust his aim. A knee to the gut, a hand striking down on the back of the neck, and the second man joined the first on the floor. The third gunman had the presence of mind to aim, not at Min Jun, but at Victoria. Time crystallized. Victoria saw the barrel of the gun swing toward her, saw the man's finger tightening on the trigger, saw her own death approaching with the inexorable certainty of a train on fixed rails. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch. Min Jun's gun cleared his jacket holster in a blur of motion. One shot, clean, precise, devastating. The third gunman's weapon dropped unfired as he grabbed his shoulder, stumbling backward with a scream that was lost in the chaos. "Now!" Min Jun shouted, grabbing Victoria's hand and pulling her toward the service entrance. She stumbled in her heels, her body finally remembering how to move, adrenaline flooding through her system like liquid fire. Behind them, more gunmen poured into the library. She heard Diane screaming, heard Marcus shouting something incoherent, heard the unmistakable sound of boots on hardwood as their attackers gave chase. Minjun kicked open the service door with enough force to tear it from one hinge, pulling Victoria through into a narrow hallway, lined with servants' quarters from an era when the Blackwood family had employed live-in staff. The hallway was dark, lit only by emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of red. Their footsteps echoed off the walls, and Victoria could hear pursuit behind them, closer than she wanted, farther than Minjun would tolerate. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd already mapped every exit, every potential choke point, every angle of attack. They burst into the kitchen, a massive space filled with industrial appliances that gleamed dully in the darkness. Minjun didn't slow, pulling her past the prep stations and toward the back door. Victoria's heel caught on the tile, and she stumbled, her ankle twisting with a sharp lance of pain that made her gasp. "I've got you," Minjun said, his arm sliding around her waist, taking her weight without breaking stride. "Almost there." The back door was reinforced steel, the kind of security measure that marked the Blackwoods as either paranoid or experienced with threats. Minjun didn't bother with the lock. He raised his gun and shot it 3 times, the mechanism sparking and grinding before the door swung open to reveal the storm-lashed grounds of the estate. Rain hit Victoria's face like needles, soaking through her dress in seconds. The storm had intensified, wind howling through the manicured gardens and bending the ancient oaks that lined the property. Lightning illuminated the world in stark flashes, turning everything into a noir film, all harsh contrasts and deep shadows. "The car," Minjun said, pointing to a black Mercedes sedan parked near the service entrance, its engine already running. "My driver's waiting." They ran. Victoria's injured ankle screamed protest with every step, but Minjun's arm around her waist kept her upright, kept her moving. The car seemed impossibly far away, the distance between them and safety stretching with each flash of lightning. Behind them, the kitchen door slammed open. Shouts in Russian, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Bullets whined past them, one striking the Mercedes and spiderwebbing the rear window. Minjun returned fire without looking back, his shots carefully placed to make their pursuers think twice about closing the distance. They reached the car and Minjun yanked open the back door, practically throwing Victoria inside before following her in. "Drive!" he shouted to the man behind the wheel, a compact Korean man in his 30s with the same deadly calm that Minjun wore, like a second skin. The driver, Victoria thought his name was Jay, though she had only met him twice, didn't need to be told twice. The Mercedes surged forward with a squeal of tires, fishtailing slightly on the wet gravel before finding traction and launching down the long driveway toward the estate's main gates. Victoria twisted in her seat, looking back at Blackwood Manor. More men were pouring out of the house now, at least a dozen of them, some heading for vehicles parked in the circular drive. Through the library windows, she could see people moving, shadows that might have been Marcus and Diane, might have been their attackers, might have been innocent relatives caught in whatever nightmare had just descended on Richard Blackwood's final gathering. "They'll kill them," she whispered, watching the manor recede into the storm. "All those people, they're going to—" "They won't," Minjun said with certainty. "Those men weren't there for the Blackwoods. They were there for you." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they made everything worse. "Then I just led them to. You led nothing." His hand found hers again, his grip firm and grounding. This was going to happen regardless, at least this way. "We controlled when and where." Victoria stared at him. You knew they were coming." "I suspected." He was checking his weapon, ejecting the magazine to count the remaining rounds with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "My sources indicated movement in the Russian networks, Cheshan specifically. Someone put out a bounty 3 days ago. A bounty on me." "On you," he confirmed. "Substantial enough to attract serious attention. I've been trying to identify the buyer, but the trail is deliberately obscured." He slid the magazine back into place with a decisive click. Tonight was a trap, for both of us. The Mercedes hit the main gates at speed, Jay barely slowing as he swiped a key card that Minjun must have provided earlier. The gates swung open just in time for them to roar through. and Victoria saw the pursuing vehicles. 3 of them now, black SUVs with tinted windows, racing to catch up. "We have company," Jay said calmly, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "I see them." Minjun shifted in his seat, positioning himself between Victoria and the rear window. "Standard evasion protocol. If they get within firing range, serpentine." "Understood." Victoria wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream. She wanted to demand answers to questions she wasn't sure she should ask. Instead, she found herself studying Minjun's profile in the intermittent light from passing street lamps. He looked almost serene, completely in his element, and she realized, not for the first time, how little she actually knew about the man she'd married. She knew he was dangerous, knew he moved in circles where violence was currency and loyalty was purchased with blood, knew that his business interests included things that would never appear on tax returns or corporate filings. But seeing him in action, watching him kill with the same casual efficiency most people brought to their morning coffee, drove home a truth she'd been avoiding for 18 months. Minjun Kang was not a good man. He was not safe. He was not the kind of person you brought home to meet your family or introduced at dinner parties. He was a predator, a killer, someone who'd built an empire on the bones of people who'd underestimated him. And he loved her, completely, obsessively, with a fierce protectiveness that terrified her almost as much as it comforted her. "Why?" she asked quietly. He didn't ask what she meant. "Because you're mine." That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. He was still watching the pursuing vehicles, his body tense and ready despite his calm voice. "I claimed you, Victoria. In my world, that means something. It means anyone who touches you dies. Anyone who threatens you dies. Anyone who even thinks about hurting you dies," she finished. "I understand the pattern." "Do you?" He finally looked at her, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "Because I'm not sure you do. I've killed for you. I will kill for you again. I will burn entire organizations to ash if they so much as speak your name without respect." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. "You are the only soft thing in my life, Victoria Laurent. The only thing that makes me remember what it's like to be human, and I will protect that with everything I have." Victoria leaned into his touch despite herself, despite the logical part of her brain that screamed this was wrong, that loving someone like Minjun was a guarantee of eventual tragedy. "The child," she whispered. "Harold mentioned a child in Richard's will." Minjun's expression shuddered immediately, the softness vanishing behind walls she'd never managed to fully breach. "We'll discuss that later, when we're safe. We need to discuss it now." "Victoria, now, Minjun. If someone is coming after me, if there's a bounty on my head, then they know. They know about Lucia." The name hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. For 18 months, they danced around the subject of the child Victoria had given birth to 6 months after marrying Richard Blackwood. The daughter who had Minjun's eyes and Victoria's smile, whose existence was documented in hospital records and birth certificates, but who had never been publicly acknowledged. The secret that could destroy everything. "Where is she?" Minjun asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Safe. With Sophia. In Switzerland. Like we agreed." "And you're certain your sister hasn't—" "She would die before she gave up Lucia's location." Victoria's certainty was absolute. Sophia Laurent might have been the older sister, might have been protective to the point of smothering, but her loyalty was unquestionable. "She knows what's at stake." Minjun nodded slowly, processing. "Then we have time. Not much, but some. If they knew where Lucia was, they wouldn't be wasting resources trying to grab you. They'd already have her." The casual way he discussed their daughter being kidnapped should have horrified Victoria. Instead, it reminded her why she'd chosen Minjun in the first place. He didn't traffic in false comfort or empty reassurances. He dealt in reality, in cold assessment of threats and methodical planning for contingencies. "The Russians," she said. "Who hired them?" "I don't know yet, but I will." The promise in those words was as solid as steel. "Jay, status?" "Still 3 vehicles pursuing," the driver responded, his eyes never leaving the road as he navigated through Stamford's downtown district at speeds that would have given Victoria a heart attack under normal circumstances. They're maintaining distance, but not giving up. Professional tale. They want to see where we go, Minjun said. Who we contact, what resources we have available. They're gathering intelligence. Do we lose them or lead them somewhere useful? Minjun considered for a moment, his tactical mind working through scenarios Victoria could only guess at. Lose them, but make it look difficult. I want them to think they almost had us. Jay smiled, a flash of white teeth in the rearview mirror. I can do that. What followed was 15 minutes of the most terrifying driving Victoria had ever experienced. Jay threaded the Mercedes through traffic with millimeter precision, running red lights and mounting curbs, using every trick in what must have been an extensive playbook. The pursuing SUVs kept pace for a while, but gradually fell back as Jay led them on a chase through increasingly narrow streets and residential neighborhoods. Finally, Jay whipped the Mercedes into an underground parking garage, killed the lights, and reversed into a spot between two larger vehicles. They sat in darkness, engine idling almost silently, while the sound of the SUVs roared past overhead. Silence, broken only by the tick of cooling engine parts and Victoria's ragged breathing. Clear, Jay said after 2 full minutes of waiting. They lost us. Good. Minjun pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like encrypted messages. Take us to the safe house in Greenwich. The one on the water. The one with the boat? That's the one. We may need to leave the country quickly. Victoria's stomach dropped. Leave the country? Minjun, I can't just... You can and you will, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Someone wants you badly enough to launch an assault on a house full of witnesses. Someone knows about Lucia. Someone has resources that rival mine. He looked at her, and for the first time since the attack began, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. We are not safe here, Victoria. None of us are. The safe house was less a house and more a fortress disguised as a luxury waterfront property. High walls, security cameras, guards who materialized from the shadows as Jay pulled into the circular drive. Minjun helped Victoria out of the car, his hand steady on her elbow as she limped on her injured ankle. Inside, the house was all clean lines and expensive furniture, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine rather than someone's actual home. Victoria had been here once before, in the early days of their marriage, when Minjun was still teaching her the extent of his precautions. Upstairs, one warrant, he said, guiding her toward a sweeping staircase. Second door on the left. There's a bathroom, clean clothes, everything you need. I'll have someone look at your ankle. Where are you going? To make phone calls, find out who the hell put a price on your head. He paused at the base of the stairs, turning back to her. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Understood? Victoria nodded, too exhausted and overwhelmed to argue. She made her way upstairs, each step a small agony on her twisted ankle, and found the room he'd indicated. It was a bedroom, tastefully decorated in shades of cream and gray, with a king-size bed that looked impossibly inviting after the chaos of the evening. She locked the door as instructed, then limped to the ensuite bathroom. Her reflection in the mirror was a disaster. Mascara running from the rain, and her tears, her carefully styled hair a wet mess. Her Dior dress ruined and clinging to her like a second skin. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd survived an assassination attempt by the thinnest of margins. The shower was a glass-enclosed luxury that probably cost more than her first car. Victoria stripped off her ruined dress and stepped under water hot enough to scald, letting it wash away the blood that wasn't hers in the rain that had soaked through to her bones. She stayed there until the water ran cold, until her skin was pink and wrinkled, until she felt marginally human again. The clothes Minjun had mentioned were in the closet, designer labels in her exact size, everything from casual wear to evening gowns. She chose yoga pants and a soft sweater, wincing as she pulled them on over her injured ankle. Someone had left a first aid kit on the bathroom counter, and she wrapped her ankle as best she could, the compression helping with the swelling. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, she found Minjun sitting in an armchair by the window, his jacket discarded, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were all lean muscle and old scars. He'd been watching the door, waiting for her, and the relief on his face when she appeared was almost painful in its intensity. "Better?" he asked. "Cleaner, at least?" She crossed to the bed and sat down, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. "Did you find out anything?" "Some. Not enough." He stood, moving to crouch in front of her so they were at eye level. His hands found her injured ankle, fingers probing gently to assess the damage. "It's not broken, badly sprained, but you'll be able to walk on it in a few days." He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw the question he wouldn't ask aloud. "I'm okay," she said, answering it anyway. "Scared, confused, angry, but okay." "You shouldn't have to be okay with this." His hands moved from her ankle to her knees, his touch grounding. "You should be at home, safe, living a normal life, not running from Russian hit squads and hiding in safe houses. I chose this life when I chose you. You chose me because you had no other option. Because Richard Blackwood was dying, and you needed protection, and I was the only one who could provide it." The bitterness in his voice was like acid. "Don't pretend this is some fairy tale, Victoria. Don't pretend you love me." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cutting. Victoria stared at him, at this man who'd killed for her tonight, who'd shielded her with his own body, who'd promised to burn the world down if anyone hurt her. This man who thought she didn't love him. "You're an idiot," she said quietly. He blinked. "What?" "You're an idiot if you think I don't love you." She reached out, her hand cupping his face the way he'd cupped hers in the car. "Yes, I married you because I needed protection. Yes, Richard was part of that arrangement. Yes, I was terrified and desperate and had nowhere else to turn." Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone, feeling the tension there. "But that was 18 months ago, Minjun. Since then, I've watched you. I've learned who you are. I've seen the monster and the man, and I choose both." "Victoria, I love you," she said, the words escaping before she could cage them. "I love your ruthlessness and your gentleness. I love how you kill without hesitation but hold Lucia like she's made of spun glass. I love that you're terrifying and tender in equal measure. I love you, Min Jun Kong, and I'm tired of pretending I don't." For a long moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he stood, pulling her up with him, his hands gentle despite their strength. "Say it again. I love you. Again. I love you, you impossible, dangerous, beautiful man." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the careful, restrained kisses they'd shared over the past 18 months. This was possession and desperation, claim and surrender, a collision of two people who'd been circling each other for too long. His hands tangled in her still damp hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and Victoria melted into him with a whimper that might have been relief or desire or both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Minjun rested his forehead against hers. "I have loved you since the moment you walked into that hospital room to care for Richard Blackwood. I have loved you through every day of your marriage to him. I have loved you through every moment you pushed me away, every time you insisted this was just an arrangement." His hands cupped her face, holding her like she was precious. "I love you, Victoria Laurent, and I will love you until the day I die." "Which hopefully won't be soon," she said, trying for levity and failing when her voice cracked. "Hopefully not." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. "But if it comes to that, know that I will take everyone who threatens you with me." Before Victoria could respond, before she could tell him that his death was unacceptable and they were going to survive this together, his phone buzzed. The sound was harsh and intrusive, shattering the moment. Minjun pulled it from his pocket, glancing at the screen, and his expression went from soft to stone in an instant. "What?" Victoria asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. "Your sister, Sophia." He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw the thing she'd been dreading since Harold Chen mentioned the child in Richard's will. "Someone attacked her house in Switzerland 3 hours ago." Victoria's legs went weak. Minjun caught her, holding her upright as the world tilted. "No, no. You said we had time. You said they didn't know where—" "I was wrong." The admission cost him. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes. "They knew. They've known all along. The attack on Blackwood Manor was a distraction, A way to separate us while they went after the real target. Lucia, Victoria whispered. Oh God, Lucia. Your sister is alive. Injured, but alive. She managed to fight them off long enough for my people to arrive. He was already moving, pulling her toward the door with gentle insistence. But Victoria… What? What is it? Minjun's expression was carved from granite. They took her. The men who attacked your sister's house. They took Lucia. The world stopped. Sound ceased. Time froze. Victoria heard her own heartbeat, felt her lungs struggle to draw breath, watched Minjun's mouth move as he continued speaking, but couldn't process the words. All she could see was her daughter, 2 years old, dark curls and gray eyes, terrified and crying for a mother who wasn't there to protect her. No, she said, then louder. No, 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 no. Minjun caught her as her knees gave out completely, lowering her to the floor and holding her as sobs tore through her body. We'll get her back, he said, his voice steady even as his hands shook. I swear to you, Victoria, we will get our daughter back. Somewhere in the house, a phone rang. Footsteps approached. A knock on the door, Jay's voice calling something Victoria couldn't process. Minjun answered, his body still wrapped around hers, and she heard him speaking rapid Korean, giving orders in a tone that promised violence to anyone who failed him. Then he was lifting her, carrying her to the bed, laying her down with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the murder in his eyes. Rest, as he said. You're in shock. I need you to rest while I work. I can't rest. My daughter, our daughter, is alive, he said with absolute certainty. They didn't take her to kill her, Victoria. They took her for leverage, which means we have time. He pulled a blanket over her, tucking it around her like she was the child. I have people all over Europe looking for her. I have contacts in every major city. I have resources you can't imagine. His hand smoothed her hair back from her face. I will find her. I promise you. Victoria wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that Minjun's resources and ruthlessness would be enough. But she'd seen what happened to people who got caught in the crossfire of his world, and the thought of Lucia, innocent, helpless Lucia, being used as a pawn in whatever game was being played, made her want to scream until her throat bled. Who? She managed. Who took her? Minjun's expression went carefully blank. I don't know yet, but I will. And when I do… His phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, and Victoria saw something cross his face, something that might have been recognition, might have been surprise, might have been the first crack in his carefully maintained control. What is it? He turned the phone toward her. On the screen was a video message, the preview image showing a pristine white room. In the center of that room, sitting on the floor surrounded by toys, was a little girl with dark curls and gray eyes. Lucia. Victoria's breath caught. Her daughter was alive, was unharmed, was playing with a stuffed rabbit like nothing was wrong. The relief was so intense it was physically painful. Play it, she said. Minjun hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. Whatever was on this video, it wasn't just proof of life. It was something worse. Play it, she repeated, her voice harder now. He did. The video started, and Lucia looked up at the camera with her father's intense gaze. She waved, a toddler's clumsy gesture, and Victoria's heart shattered into pieces. Then a figure moved into frame. A man, his face obscured by shadows, his voice electronically distorted when he spoke. Hello, Mrs. Kang. Or should I say Mrs. Blackwood? Or perhaps I should use your real name, the one you were born with, before you started running. Victoria went cold. You're wondering who I am, the voice continued. You're wondering what I want. You're wondering if I'll hurt this beautiful child. A pause. The answer to the last question is, that depends entirely on you. Minjun's hand found hers, squeezing tight enough to hurt. I want what Richard Blackwood promised me, what he stole before he died. $50 million in bearer bonds, hidden somewhere only you can access. The figure moved closer to Lucia, and Victoria's free hand clutched at the blanket. You have 48 hours to deliver them to the location I'll send you. Come alone. No police, no Minjun, no cavalry riding to the rescue. Just you, the bonds, and a prayer that I'm feeling merciful. The figure crouched down next to Lucia, and even though his face was hidden, Victoria could feel him smiling. Fail, and your daughter disappears. Permanently. Do we have an understanding, Victoria? The video ended. Silence filled the room, broken only by Victoria's ragged breathing and the distant sound of rain against windows. Bearer bonds, Minjun said quietly. $50 million. Did Richard ever mention anything about... No. Victoria's voice was hollow. I don't know anything about bearer bonds. I don't have access to any money. Richard never... She stopped, remembered. Wait, what? The day before he died, he gave me something. A key. She pressed her hands to her temples, trying to remember through the fog of grief and morphine-dulled hours. He said it was for a safety deposit box. Said I'd know when to use it. But I thought he was confused, delirious from the medication. I didn't think... Where's the key now? Victoria's eyes widened. Still at Blackwood Manor, in the room I stayed in, hidden in... She grabbed Minjun's arm. We have to go back. We have to get that key. Going back to Blackwood Manor is suicide. It's probably crawling with police by now, not to mention whoever else might be watching. I don't care. She was on her feet now, adrenaline overriding shock and exhaustion. My daughter's out there with a monster who will kill her if I don't deliver something I don't have. We need that key. Minjun studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. All right, we go back. But we do this smart, we do this careful, and we do exactly what I say. Understood? Understood. He pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. I will get her back, Victoria. I swear on everything I am, I will bring our daughter home. Victoria wanted to believe him. She had to believe him. Because the alternative, that Lucia was gone forever, that her daughter would become another casualty in a war Victoria had never wanted to fight, was unbearable. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, Victoria felt something in her chest harden, crystallize, become as sharp and dangerous as the man holding her. She'd been running for 2 years, hiding, pretending to be weak and helpless and in need of protection. No more. If someone wanted to use her daughter as leverage, wanted to drag her back into the world she'd fled, wanted to make her dance like a puppet on strings of fear and desperation, they were about to learn a very painful lesson. Victoria Laurent had spent 2 years being soft, being careful, being afraid, but she'd learned from the best, and Minjun Kang had taught her that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to become the monster in the shadows. The rain had stopped by the time they approached Blackwood Manor again, but the damage from the storm lingered in downed branches and puddles that reflected the emergency lights still flashing in the circular drive. 3 police cars, an ambulance, and what looked like a federal vehicle were parked haphazardly across the gravel, their presence turning the stately manor into a crime scene. Minjun had the Mercedes parked 2 blocks away, hidden behind an abandoned gas station that gave them a clear view of the estate's eastern wall. He'd changed clothes, all black now, tactical gear that made him look like a shadow given human form. Victoria wore similar attire, borrowed from the safe house's apparently extensive wardrobe of covert operations clothing. The key, Minjun said, studying the manor through a pair of military-grade binoculars. Where exactly did you hide it? My room, 3rd floor, east wing. There's a vanity with a loose panel in the back of the bottom drawer. Victoria could picture it perfectly. The ornate antique furniture Richard had insisted on filling her room with. Furniture she'd hated on sight but had learned to tolerate. The key is wrapped in a handkerchief, tucked behind the panel. Security? Standard locks on the doors. Richard never bothered with anything more sophisticated in the residential wings. He said it made the house feel like a prison. She paused. Of course, that was before someone tried to kill him. Minjun lowered the binoculars, his expression thoughtful. Someone tried to kill Richard? You didn't know. Victoria stared at him. 6 months before he died, someone broke into the manor. Got all the way to his bedroom before security stopped them. The police said it was a robbery gone wrong, but Richard knew better. He never told me who he thought was behind it, but after that, he insisted I sleep in a different wing. Said it was safer. And 3 months later, he married you. Yes, Victoria saw where this was going. You think the attack on Richard is connected to this? To whoever took Lucia? I think Richard Blackwood had enemies we're only beginning to understand. Minjun raised the binoculars again, scanning the perimeter. The question is whether those enemies became yours when you married him, or whether you had them all along and Richard was trying to protect you from them. The distinction mattered, Victoria realized. If Richard's enemies were after her, they wanted the bonds because Richard had stolen them. But if her own past had caught up with her, if someone from before her marriage to Richard, before her relationship with Minjun, before she'd reinvented herself as a respectable private nurse, then the bonds might be secondary to something far more dangerous. There, Minjun said, pointing. East wall, near the old servants' entrance. Security cameras down. See the way it's hanging? Someone disabled it, probably during the attack earlier. So we go through there? We go through there. He handed her a small earpiece. Stay in contact. If anything goes wrong, you run. Don't wait for me. Don't try to be heroic. Just run. Victoria fitted the earpiece, testing the connection. Minjun's voice came through crystal clear, and she nodded. What about you? I'll be right behind you, always. He produced 2 weapons, compact, deadly efficient, and offered one to her. Do you remember how to use this? She did. Minjun had insisted on teaching her basic firearm safety early in their relationship, though she'd hoped never to need the skill. The weight of the gun in her hand was both familiar and foreign, a tool she understood intellectually, but had never wanted to use. Safety's here, he said, guiding her fingers. Point, squeeze, don't pull. Aim for center mass. If you have to shoot someone, shoot to kill. Wounded enemies are unpredictable. The casual brutality of the instructions should have disturbed her. Instead, Victoria found herself nodding, accepting the logic. This was Minjun's world, a place where mercy was weakness and hesitation meant death. If she was going to survive long enough to save her daughter, she needed to think like he did. They moved through the darkness like wraiths, Minjun leading the way with Victoria close behind. The grounds were extensive, full of shadowed places where the emergency lights didn't reach. They stayed low, using the landscaping for cover, and approached the disabled camera with caution that proved unnecessary. Whoever had taken it out wasn't coming back. The servants' entrance was unlocked, the door hanging slightly ajar. Minjun tested it carefully, checking for wires or triggers, before nodding Victoria through. Inside, the house was dark and silent, the earlier chaos replaced by the hollow emptiness of a place that had seen violence and wasn't sure what to do with itself. They could hear voices from the main floor, police probably, or federal agents interviewing the survivors. Victoria caught fragments of conversation, Marcus's voice raised in indignation about something, Diane's calmer tones trying to soothe him. Good. If the siblings were still here, still being questioned, they wouldn't be wandering the halls. The servants' staircase was narrow and steep, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Victoria's injured ankle protested with each step, but she pushed through the pain, focusing on the goal. 3rd floor, east wing, her room, the key that might save her daughter's life. They emerged into a hallway Victoria knew well, expensive runner carpet, paintings of Blackwood ancestors glaring down from the walls, doors leading to bedrooms that had housed 3 generations of the family. Her room was at the end, overlooking the gardens, and she'd always appreciated the isolation, even as she'd hated everything it represented. Clear, Minjun murmured, checking each doorway as they passed. His movements were fluid and controlled, years of training evident in every gesture. Your room is which one? Last door, corner room with the bay windows. They reached it without incident, and Victoria turned the handle with hands that had started to shake. The door opened smoothly, revealing a space that felt like stepping back in time. Nothing had been disturbed. The bed was still made with the same cream-colored duvet she'd chosen, her few personal items still arranged on the dresser. The vanity where she'd sat countless mornings staring at a reflection she barely recognized. The vanity, she said, crossing to it quickly. Bottom drawer. Minjun positioned himself by the door, watching the hallway while Victoria worked. The drawer stuck slightly, swollen from humidity, but yielded when she pulled harder. Inside were the mundane remnants of her life here. Makeup she rarely wore, hair accessories, a journal she'd started and abandoned after 3 entries. And in the back, behind a panel that looked solid but shifted when she pressed the right spot, a small bundle wrapped in white linen. Victoria's fingers closed around it, and she felt the hard shape of a key through the fabric. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. She had it. She had the key to whatever Richard had hidden, whatever these monsters wanted badly enough to steal a child. "Got it," she said, standing. Minjun turned, and his expression shifted from alertness to something else, something that made Victoria's instincts scream a warning. "Victoria," he said carefully, "don't move." She froze. "What?" "There's a pressure plate under the rug by the vanity. You must have triggered it when you stood up." Victoria looked down, and her blood turned to ice. The antique rug had shifted slightly, revealing the edge of what looked like a metal plate set flush with the floor. Her foot was resting directly on it, and she could feel the slight give of a mechanism waiting to activate. "Richard was more paranoid than we thought," Minjun said, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from him. "Don't move. Don't shift your weight. I need to see what this is connected to." He dropped to his knees, carefully lifting the edge of the rug. Victoria watched him work, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. This was insane. Richard had never mentioned booby-trapping her room. Why would he? Unless he'd known someone would come looking. Unless he'd anticipated that his death wouldn't be the end of whatever game he was playing. Unless Victoria had been less a wife and more a piece on a chessboard she hadn't known existed. "It's wired to the door frame," Minjun said, tracing nearly invisible wires with his fingers. "Probably an explosive. Small, but in this room contained space." He looked up at her, and Victoria saw her own death reflected in his eyes. "When you step off that plate, we have maybe 3 seconds before detonation. So I don't step off." "Victoria, you said it yourself. 3 seconds. You can't disarm it in 3 seconds." Her voice was surprisingly calm, her hands steady as she clutched the key. "But you can get out of the room. Get to safety." "I'm not leaving you." "Minjun, I'm not leaving you." Each word was delivered with absolute finality. "We survive this together or not at all." Victoria wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that Lucia needed at least one parent, that his death would accomplish nothing, that she'd never forgive herself if he died because of her. But she knew that expression, that tone. Minjun had made his decision, and no force on earth would change it. "Then we jump," she said. "On 3, I step off the plate, and we both jump for the window. The window is 15 feet away and made of reinforced glass. We'll never. Do you have a better idea?" Silence. Then Minjun stood, positioning himself beside her, his hand finding hers. "On 3, he agreed. We jump together." Victoria adjusted her grip on the key, making sure it was secure in her pocket. Everything else, the journal, the makeup, the remnants of her life as Mrs. Blackwood, could burn. Only the key mattered. Only saving Lucia mattered. 1, Minjun counted, his body coiled and ready. 2, Victoria's muscles tensed, preparing for the sprint of her life. 3, she stepped off the plate and they ran. The world contracted to a tunnel of focused intention. The window ahead, Minjun's hand in hers, the sound of their footsteps on hardwood. Behind them, Victoria heard the click of the mechanism activating, the soft hiss of a fuse catching. Minjun hit the window first, his shoulder driving through the glass with enough force to shatter it. Victoria felt the explosion more than heard it, a wave of heat and pressure that lifted her off her feet and sent her flying through the broken window into the night air. For a moment, she was weightless, flying, free from gravity and consequence, and the weight of decisions that had led her to this moment. Then physics reasserted itself and she was falling, the ground rushing up to meet her with brutal inevitability. Minjun twisted in midair, positioning his body beneath hers, taking the impact. They hit the sloped roof of the first-floor conservatory hard enough to knock the breath from Victoria's lungs. Glass shattered beneath them, the antique structure never designed to hold their combined weight, and they were falling again, this time into the greenhouse interior. Victoria landed in a bed of orchids, the flowers cushioning her fall enough to prevent serious injury. Minjun hit the stone pathway beside her with a sickening crack, and for a horrible moment, Victoria thought he was dead. Then he groaned and sat up, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. I really need to stop jumping through windows with you. The relief was so intense, Victoria almost laughed. Almost. But then reality crashed back. The explosion, the manor, the police who would have heard the blast and were probably already on their way. They needed to move. Can you walk? She asked, pulling herself free of the orchids. I can run if necessary. He was already on his feet, swaying slightly but functional. The key? Victoria checked her pocket, and her heart sank. The fabric was torn, the pocket empty. No, 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 no. Where? I had it and I... She looked around frantically, searching the orchid bed, the broken glass, the pathway. There, a glint of metal among the scattered petals. She lunged for it, her fingers closing around the key just as the conservatory door burst open. Freeze! Police! Victoria and Minjun turned as one, finding themselves facing 3 officers with weapons drawn. Behind them, through the shattered conservatory windows, Victoria could see more police flooding the grounds, flashlights cutting through the darkness like accusing fingers. Hands up! Both of you, hands where we can see them! Minjun raised his hands slowly, and Victoria followed suit, the key pressed into her palm where they couldn't see it. This was bad. This was worse than bad. They were caught, surrounded, with no clear escape route and no time to plan. Minjun Kang, one of the officers said, recognition dawning. We've been looking for you. You're wanted for questioning in connection with... I know what I'm wanted for, Minjun interrupted calmly, and I'm happy to answer questions. But first, I need you to understand something. You're in no position to negotiate. Someone has kidnapped my daughter. The words fell like stones into still water. They're demanding $50 million in bearer bonds for her return. We have less than 48 hours. And every second you waste pointing guns at us is a second closer to my child's death. The officers exchanged glances. A kidnapping? We haven't received any reports. Because the kidnappers specifically said no police. Victoria stepped forward, ignoring the way the guns tracked her movement. My name is Victoria Laurent. I was married to Richard Blackwood, and someone took my 2-year-old daughter 3 hours ago from Switzerland. If you don't let us go, she dies. Even if that's true, the lead officer said, we can't just let you walk away. There was an attack here earlier tonight, multiple casualties, and now an explosion. Casualties? Victoria's voice cracked. Who? Was anyone killed? The officer's expression softened slightly. No fatalities. Several injuries, but everyone survived. You're lucky the Russian hit squad was more interested in grabbing you than wholesale slaughter. Russian hit squad. The confirmation that this was bigger than just a kidnapping, that forces were moving against them with professional precision, made Victoria's head spin. Who had she and Minjun angered badly enough to warrant this level of response? Officer Davis, a new voice called from outside the conservatory. A man in a suit picked his way through the debris, and Victoria recognized him immediately. FBI, based on the badge clipped to his belt. We need to talk to these two, now. Agent Morrison, the officer said, lowering his weapon slightly. They claim there's been a kidnapping, a child. Morrison studied them both with the assessing gaze of someone trained to spot lies. He was maybe 50, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much. A kidnapping that somehow led you back to an active crime scene, breaking and entering, and triggering what appears to have been a booby trap? We needed something from the house, Minjun said. Something that might save my daughter's life. And did you find it? Victoria's hand clenched around the key. If she admitted to having it, they'd take it as evidence. If she lied and they searched her, they'd find it anyway. The only option was to trust that this FBI agent cared more about a kidnapped child than jurisdictional protocols. Yes, she said, I found it. A key to a safety deposit box that supposedly contains what the kidnappers want. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Bearer bonds? $50 million worth? You know about them. I know Richard Blackwood was under investigation for money laundering. I know he had connections to several criminal organizations, both domestic and international. And I know that 2 weeks before his death, he liquidated a substantial portion of his assets and converted them to bearer bonds. Morrison stepped closer, his expression unreadable. What I don't know is why he would give access to those bonds to his nurse-turned-wife instead of his own children. Victoria met his gaze steadily. Maybe because his children would have squandered them, or maybe because he knew I'd use them for something important. Like saving your daughter from kidnappers. Yes? Morrison was silent for a long moment, weighing options Victoria could only guess at. Finally, he turned to Officer Davis. Let them go. What? Agent Morrison, they're suspects in their parents trying to save their child, and unless you want the headlines to read, Police obstruct rescue of kidnapped toddler, I suggest you lower your weapons and let them walk out of here. Morrison's tone left no room for argument. Mrs. Laurent, Mr. Kang, you have 48 hours to resolve this situation. After that, I want both of you in my office answering questions about Richard Blackwood's criminal activities. Am I clear? Crystal, Minjun said. And Mrs. Lauren. Morrison pulled a business card from his pocket, offering it to her. When you get your daughter back, not if, when, call me. I think you and I need to have a conversation about exactly what your late husband was involved in. Victoria took the card, slipping it into her torn pocket alongside the key. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You still have to get the bonds and make the exchange without getting yourself killed. And based on what we've seen tonight, the people you're dealing with are not interested in playing fair. That was an understatement. Victoria followed Minjun as they made their way through the police cordon, officers parting reluctantly to let them pass. Behind them, Blackwood Manor burned, not completely, but enough that the third floor where her room had been was engulfed in flames, smoke billowing into the night sky. Everything she'd left behind was gone now. The journals, the clothes, the last traces of her life as Mrs. Blackwood. In a way, it felt appropriate. That life had been a lie anyway, a role she'd played to survive. The only thing that mattered was the key in her pocket and the daughter waiting to be rescued. Jay had the Mercedes running when they reached the street, and they climbed in without discussion. Where to? He asked, pulling away from the curb with careful restraint, despite the urgency Victoria could feel radiating from all of them. Safe house, Minjun said. We need to clean up and make plans. Victoria, where would Richard have kept a safety deposit box? I don't know. He had accounts all over. New York, Connecticut, overseas. He never told me specifics. She turned the key over in her hands, studying it. Standard size, no markings, nothing to indicate which bank or even which country. This could be anywhere. Then we start with the most likely locations and work our way out. Minjun pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. I have people who can check every major bank in the tri-state area. If the bonds are accessible, we'll find them. Victoria wanted to share his confidence, wanted to believe that Minjun's resources and determination would be enough, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something, that Richard's game had layers they hadn't begun to understand. The video played in her mind on loop. Lucia, sitting in that white room, playing with her rabbit, unaware of the danger, trusting that her mother would come for her, that the world was safe and loving parents always rescued their children. I'm coming, baby, Victoria whispered to the window, watching the Connecticut landscape blur past. Mommy's coming. The safe house in Greenwich felt different in the pre-dawn hours, less like a fortress and more like a tomb. Victoria sat at the dining room table, the key laid out before her like an accusation, while Minjun paced behind her with his phone pressed to his ear. He'd been making calls for 3 hours, speaking in rapid Korean, Mandarin, and occasionally English, coordinating resources across continents. Victoria had changed out of the torn tactical gear into jeans and a sweater, her injured ankle wrapped fresh and throbbing with a dull ache that she barely noticed. Pain was abstract now, a distant concern compared to the countdown ticking in her head. 45 hours remaining. 45 hours to find bearer bonds worth $50 million, deliver them to a location she didn't know, and pray that whoever had Lucia would actually return her. The prayer part seemed particularly optimistic. Nothing, Minjun said, disconnecting his latest call and tossing the phone onto the table with controlled violence. I've checked every major bank in New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. No safety deposit boxes registered to Richard Blackwood that match this key. No recent rentals under his name or any of his known aliases. What about offshore? Victoria asked, though the thought of the bonds being in Switzerland or the Cayman Islands made her want to scream. They didn't have time for international travel. Already checking, but if Richard went offshore, he would have left you more than just a key. Access codes, account numbers, something. Minjun dropped into the chair beside her, exhaustion evident in the lines around his eyes. Unless he assumed you'd know where to look. I wouldn't. Richard and I never discussed his finances. He kept me completely separate from his business dealings. Victoria picked up the key, turning it over in her fingers. Wait, he said something. The day he gave this to me, he said, remember where we met? Where you met? Minjun leaned forward. Where was that? New York Presbyterian Hospital. I was working a double shift. He'd come in for treatment. His regular nurse had called in sick, and they assigned me to his room. Victoria closed her eyes, pulling the memory into focus. He was charming, even dying. Made jokes about the terrible hospital food, asked about my life, seemed genuinely interested. I thought he was just a lonely old man trying to make conversation. But he wasn't. No, he was assessing me, deciding if I could be useful. The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She'd made peace with Richard's manipulation months ago, understood that their marriage had been transactional from the start, but now knowing he'd planned even this, had anticipated his own death and set up this elaborate treasure hunt, made her wonder how much of her life had been her choice and how much had been Richard Blackwood pulling strings. Minjun's hand covered hers, his touch grounding. The hospital. Could he have rented a safety deposit box near there? Maybe, but why would... Victoria stopped, remembering. There was a bank across the street from the hospital. Richard pointed it out once, said it was the oldest continuously operating bank in Manhattan, said his grandfather had kept an account there during the Depression. First Manhattan Savings and Trust, Minjun said immediately, already pulling up information on his phone. Founded 1891, family-owned until the 60s, now part of a larger holding company, but still operates under the original name. He looked up, and Victoria saw hope flickering in his dark eyes. That has to be it. It's Sunday morning. Banks aren't open. Banks open for people like me. Minjun was already dialing, his expression shifting into the cold calculation that meant someone was about to regret telling him no. I know the regional manager. He owes me a favor. Several favors, actually. Victoria listened as Minjun made his case, politely at first, then with increasing pressure, as the person on the other end apparently tried to refuse. Finally, Minjun said something in Korean that made even Victoria wince at the tone, and disconnected. He'll meet us there in 90 minutes, Minjun said, and he'll open the vault. What did you say to him? That his daughter attends Columbia on a scholarship funded by my organization, and that I'd hate for administrative errors to affect her enrollment status. Minjun's expression was completely neutral, as if threatening someone's child's education was no different than ordering coffee. He was very understanding after that. Victoria should have been horrified, should have protested that using innocent people as leverage was exactly the kind of behavior that had created this nightmare in the first place. But she couldn't find it in herself to care. Not when Lucia was out there, not when the clock was ticking, not when playing fair meant losing everything that mattered. I need to call Sophia, she said. Make sure she's okay. Make sure she hasn't heard anything. Minjun nodded, sliding his phone across the table. Use this. It's encrypted, harder to trace. Victoria dialed her sister's number from memory, her heart hammering as it rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, Sophia answered, her voice thick with pain and exhaustion. Hello? Sophie, it's me. Victoria. Her sister's relief was palpable, followed immediately by anguish. Oh God, Victoria, I'm so sorry. I tried to stop them. I fought, but there were so many and they had guns and... I know you did everything you could. Victoria's throat tightened. Are you okay? Are you safe? I'm in the hospital. Broken ribs, concussion, dislocated shoulder. The doctors say I'll be fine. But Victoria, they took her. They took Lucia and I couldn't stop them. Sophia was crying now. Great heaving sobs that made Victoria's own tears spill over. She was calling for you, kept saying, "Mommy coming? Mommy coming?" And I couldn't tell her yes because I didn't know if... "I'm coming," Victoria said fiercely. "I'm getting her back, Sophie. I promise you." How? These men, they weren't random criminals. They moved like soldiers. They knew exactly where she was, exactly when to strike. They had a photograph of her, Victoria, a recent one. Someone's been watching us. The revelation sent ice through Victoria's veins. How recent? Last week. She was wearing the yellow dress I bought her for her birthday, the one with the sunflowers. Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone's been in my house, Victoria. Someone's been close enough to photograph our baby, and we never knew. Victoria looked at Min Jun, who'd been listening to her side of the conversation with increasing tension. He mouthed a question. Surveillance? She nodded and watched his expression go from concerned to murderous. Sophie, I need you to do something for me, Victoria said. When you get out of the hospital, don't go home. Go to a hotel, somewhere public with lots of security. Use cash. Don't give your real name. And don't tell anyone. Not the police, not your friends, not anyone, where you are. You think they'll come back? I think they'll do whatever they need to do to make sure I cooperate. And that means your leverage. Victoria hated saying it, hated making her sister even more afraid than she already was. But honesty was the only gift she could give right now. Stay hidden. Stay safe. I'll contact you when this is over. And if it's not over, if something happens to you, then Min Jun will make sure you're protected, won't you? She looked at him, making it a command rather than a question. With my life, Min Jun said, loud enough for Sophia to hear. Your sister will never be alone in this world, Sophia. I promise you. They said their goodbyes, inadequate words for a situation that defied language, and Victoria disconnected. She sat in silence for a moment, processing the new information. Someone had been surveilling Sophia's house in Switzerland. Someone had been close enough to photograph Lucia without either woman noticing. That level of surveillance required resources, patience, and expertise that went far beyond common criminals. This is bigger than we thought, Min Jun said, voicing what Victoria was already thinking. This isn't just about the bonds. This is about Richard's entire network. What do you mean? Richard Blackwood didn't just launder money. He was a facilitator. He connected people who needed things with people who could provide them. Weapons, intelligence, transportation across borders. Min Jun stood, moving to the window where dawn was beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. I knew some of this when I agreed to let you marry him. Knew he was dangerous, knew he had connections that could protect you from your own past, but I didn't know the full extent. My own past, Victoria repeated. You keep saying that. What do you think I'm running from, Min Jun? He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw a question he'd been too careful to ask. I don't know. You've never told me. Never explained why a talented nurse with a bright future would agree to marry a dying criminal twice her age. Never explained why you were so terrified when we first met, or why you flinch sometimes when you hear certain accents, or why you check every room for exits before you relax. He crossed back to her, kneeling so they were eye level. I've given you space, given you time. But Victoria, if there's something in your past that's connected to this, I need to know. Now. She wanted to lie, wanted to keep her secrets buried where they'd been for 3 years, where they were safe and couldn't hurt anyone. But Lucia's life hung in the balance, and her daughter deserved a mother who was brave enough to face the truth. My real name, Victoria said slowly, each word feeling like pulling teeth, isn't Victoria Laurent. It's Sarah Mitchell. Min Jun's expression didn't change, but she saw him processing the information, filing it away. Okay, Sarah Mitchell. Why change it? Because Sarah Mitchell was married to a man named David Chen, and David Chen worked for a very dangerous organization that didn't appreciate when his wife discovered what he really did for a living and threatened to go to the police. The silence that followed was absolute. Min Jun stared at her, and Victoria watched understanding dawn in his eyes. Not just understanding of her past, but recognition of the name she'd mentioned. David Chen, he said quietly. Hong Kong. Money laundering operation disguised as import-export business. Disappeared 4 years ago. Presumed dead. He paused. That David Chen? Yes. Victoria, Sarah, that organization. The one David worked for. Minjun's voice was very careful now. That was the Wo Triad, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Southeast Asia. I know. And you threatened to expose them to the police. I was young, stupid. I thought I was married to a legitimate businessman. When I found out the truth, found the books he kept, saw the names of people who'd disappeared. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm room. I told him I wanted out. Told him I'd go to the authorities if he didn't let me leave. And he said? He laughed. Then he broke my arm and told me that wives who betrayed the organization ended up in the harbor wearing concrete shoes. Victoria touched her left forearm unconsciously, remembering the snap of bone, the white-hot pain. He gave me a week to reconsider, to prove my loyalty, to accept my place. But you ran. I ran, emptied our bank account, bought a fake passport, flew to New York, and reinvented myself as Victoria Laurent. Changed everything. My name, my appearance, my entire history. Started over from nothing. She looked at Minjun, needing him to understand. I thought I was free. Thought 3 years and an ocean were enough distance. But if the Wo found me, they'd want revenge, Minjun finished, for the money you stole, for the betrayal, for making them look weak. He stood abruptly, pacing again. And Richard knew. He knew who you were, what you were running from. That's why he married you, not to protect you from me or my world, but to protect you from them. But how would they find me? I was so careful. I never contacted anyone from my old life. Never used my real name. Never. Your daughter, Minjun said, the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. When you gave birth to Lucia, you had to provide medical records. Real medical records because complications during pregnancy. You used your original blood type, your real medical history. Victoria's hands flew to her mouth. Oh God. Someone in the hospital system, maybe someone the triad paid to watch for specific markers, maybe someone who owed them a favor. They found you through the one thing you couldn't fake, your biology. Minjun's fists clenched, and they've been watching ever since, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the bonds, Victoria said desperately. The kidnapper demanded Richard's bonds. If this is about revenge, why would they care about money? Because the bonds aren't just money? Minjun pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. Bearer bonds are untraceable. $50 million in completely anonymous, transferable wealth. Perfect for funding operations, paying bribes, moving money without any government oversight. He looked up. Richard didn't just have money, Victoria. He had power. And whoever gets those bonds gets access to his entire network. The magnitude of what she'd stumbled into was staggering. Victoria had thought she was just a nurse who'd married a dying man for protection. Had thought her biggest problem was navigating the politics of a wealthy family who resented her presence. But she'd actually been a piece in a much larger game, one that involved international criminal organizations, money laundering networks, and power struggles she couldn't begin to understand. So what do we do? She asked. Even if we get the bonds, even if we make the exchange, they'll still kill us. They'll kill Lucia just to make a point. Maybe, Minjun's expression was thoughtful, or maybe we change the game. How? We don't just give them the bonds, we offer them something better. He turned to face her fully, and Victoria saw the strategist at work, the man who'd built an empire by thinking 3 moves ahead of everyone else. We offer them David Chen. Victoria's blood went cold. David is dead. You said so yourself. Disappeared 4 years ago. Presumed is not confirmed, and I have resources that could find him if he's alive. The Wo. Wo wants revenge on you, but they want David more. He stole from them, betrayed them, disappeared with organizational secrets. Minjun moved closer, his hands settling on her shoulders. If we can deliver David Chen, we can negotiate. Get Lucia back and buy your freedom. Permanently. And if David is actually dead, then we find his body and deliver that. Or we create enough evidence that they believe he's dead and move on. Minjun's grip tightened slightly. I will not let them have you, Victoria. I will not let them have our daughter. If that means burning through every resource I have, calling in every favor, making deals with people I'd rather shoot, so be it. Victoria stared at him, this man who'd promised to destroy the world for her, and clearly meant it. She should have been afraid of his intensity, his willingness to do whatever was necessary. Instead, she felt something else. A fierce gratitude that in a world full of predators, she'd somehow found the apex predator who'd decided she was worth protecting. Okay, she said. We find David. We use him as leverage. We get Lucia back. She pulled the key from her pocket, holding it up between them. But first we get those bonds. Minjun checked his watch. We have an hour before we meet the bank manager. You should rest. I can't rest, not while she's out there. Then eat something. You haven't had food in 12 hours. He moved to the kitchen and Victoria heard him opening cabinets, the clink of dishes. You're no good to Lucia if you collapse from exhaustion or hunger. He was right, though Victoria's stomach churned at the thought of food. Still, she forced herself to accept the toast and coffee he prepared, eating mechanically while her mind raced through scenarios. What if the bonds weren't in the bank? What if they'd been destroyed in some financial crisis? What if Richard had lied about everything and the key was just one final manipulation? Stop, Minjun said, reading her thoughts with the accuracy that came from 18 months of marriage. We'll deal with each problem as it comes. Right now, we focus on the next step. Just the next step. Victoria nodded, taking another bite of toast. The next step. Get to the bank. Open the box. Secure the bonds. Everything after that was future Victoria's problem. Her phone, Minjun's phone technically, buzzed on the table. She picked it up, expecting another update from one of his contacts, and froze. The message was from an unknown number. No words, just an image. Lucia, still in the white room. But now there was a clock visible on the wall behind her, a countdown timer showing 42 hours and 17 minutes. And beneath the image, a single line of text. Tick-tock, Sarah Mitchell. Or should I say Victoria? Or Mrs. Blackwood? So many names for one woman. But your daughter only has one name, and soon she won't have that either. Minjun snatched the phone from her shaking hands, reading the message. His face went absolutely still, that dangerous calm settling over him like a shroud. They know all your identities. They've been tracking you longer than we thought. How? Victoria's voice came out as a whisper. How could they possibly? Because someone told them. Minjun looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the thing that terrified her most. Someone close to this situation, someone who knows about Richard, about our marriage, about Lucia. His jaw clenched. Someone betrayed you, Victoria, and when I find out who, they're going to wish they'd never been born. The toast sat like lead in Victoria's stomach. A traitor. Someone in their circle, someone they'd trusted, had sold her out, had given the Woshing Wu everything they needed to destroy her. But who? Richard was dead. Sophia would never betray her. Minjun's people were loyal to the point of fanaticism. That left Marcus, she said suddenly, or Diane. They had access to all of Richard's records. They've been going through his papers, his computer, everything he owned. Looking for evidence of the bonds, Minjun said, following her logic, and finding a lot more. Finding your real identity. Finding proof that you were hiding from the triad. Finding leverage they could use. But why would they help the Woshing Wu? What would they gain? Minjun's smile was sharp and cold. The bonds. If the triad gets the bonds in exchange for dealing with you, Marcus and Diane get to contest Richard's will without interference. They get the estate, the company, everything. And all it costs them is betraying their father's widow to a criminal organization. Victoria felt sick. She'd known Marcus and Diane hated her, but this, actively conspiring with murderers to destroy her and kidnap her child, was beyond hatred. This was evil. We need to move, Minjun said, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. If they're tracking our communications, they might know about the bank. We need to get there, get the bonds, and disappear before they can set up an ambush. But the bank manager is meeting us there in 30 minutes, which means we leave now. Minjun grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the door. Jay, we're moving. The driver appeared instantly, keys in hand. Where to? First Manhattan Savings and Trust. Fast as you can, but careful. Assume we're being followed. They piled into the Mercedes and Jay pulled out with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd driven getaway cars before. Victoria watched the safe house disappear behind them, wondering if she'd ever see it again. Wondering if any of them would survive the next 42 hours. The countdown timer haunted her. 42 hours and 17 minutes. 42 hours to find the bonds, locate David Chen, negotiate with the triad, and save her daughter. 42 hours to pull off a miracle. Minjun's hand found hers in the darkness of the car's interior, his fingers interlacing with hers in a grip that was both gentle and unyielding. We'll get her back, he said quietly. I promise you, Victoria. We'll get Lucia back, and then we'll make everyone who hurt her pay. Victoria squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his certainty. She believed him, had to believe him, because the alternative, that her daughter would die because Victoria had been too weak, too naive, too trusting, was unbearable. The Mercedes raced through pre-dawn Manhattan, heading toward First Manhattan Savings and Trust, and whatever secrets Richard Blackwood had locked away. Behind them, unseen but undoubtedly present, enemies gathered. The Wo Xing Wo, Marcus and Diane Blackwood, Russian mercenaries, forces that wanted Victoria dead or destroyed or disappeared. But they'd forgotten something. Victoria wasn't Sarah Mitchell anymore, the frightened wife who'd run from danger. She wasn't even Victoria Laurent, the nurse playing at respectability. She was Victoria Moretti now, though she'd kept her married name of Laurent for simplicity, wife to a man who commanded armies and toppled empires. Mother to a daughter who needed her to be strong, and she would be strong. She would be ruthless. She would be whatever was necessary to bring Lucia home, even if it meant becoming the very monster she'd spent 3 years running from. First Manhattan Savings and Trust occupied a corner building in Lower Manhattan that looked like it had been transplanted from a different era. All marble columns and brass fixtures, the kind of place where robber barons had once stored their fortunes. The bank manager, a thin man in his 50s named Gerald Hutchins, was waiting nervously by the entrance when they arrived, his hands shaking as he unlocked the heavy doors. Mr. Kang, he said, his voice tight with barely suppressed anxiety, I want you to know that I'm only doing this under duress. The board will have my head if they find out I opened the vault outside of business hours without proper authorization. The board will never know, Minjun said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. And your daughter's scholarship will remain intact. Everyone wins, Mr. Hutchins. Hutchins swallowed hard and nodded, leading them through the lobby. The interior was as opulent as the exterior promised. Polished marble floors, oil paintings of distinguished-looking men who were probably long-dead bank presidents, teller windows protected by ornate brass bars that had likely never stopped a determined robber. It smelled of old money and older secrets. The safety deposit boxes are in the basement vault, Hutchins said, his shoes clicking against the marble as he led them toward a discreet door marked Authorized Personnel Only. We maintain one of the oldest systems in Manhattan. Some of these boxes have been in continuous use since the 1920s. They descended a narrow staircase into a temperature-controlled basement that felt more like a bunker than a bank. The walls were reinforced concrete, the lighting harsh fluorescent that made everyone look slightly ill. At the end of a short hallway stood the vault door, massive, circular, the kind of thing you'd see in heist movies. Hutchins worked the combination with trembling fingers, the tumblers clicking with mechanical precision. The door swung open with a groan of protest, revealing a room lined floor to ceiling with small metal doors, each one numbered and locked. Do you know which box? Hutchins asked, pulling out a ledger that looked like it predated computers by several decades. Victoria handed him the key. Can you tell from this? Hutchins examined it, then flipped through the ledger with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Box 237, registered to... He paused, his face going pale. This can't be right. What? Minjun moved closer, his presence making Hutchins take an involuntary step backward. The box is registered to Richard Blackwood, yes, but according to our records, it was originally opened in 1943 by someone named Chen Wei. Hutchins looked up, confused. That's impossible. Mr. Blackwood would have been... He wasn't even born yet. Victoria felt the world tilt. Chen Wei, a Chinese name. Could it be coincidence? Could Richard have simply acquired a safety deposit box that happened to belong to someone with the same surname as David's family? Where's the box? Minjun asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the tension Victoria could feel radiating from him. Here. Hutchins led them to a section of boxes in the far corner, finding number 237 near the bottom. This key should open it. I'll need to verify the signature card, but given the circumstances... He pulled a card from a file box, comparing the signature to one he had in the ledger. Everything appears to be in order. The box is yours to access, Mrs. Blackwood. Victoria knelt in front of the box, her hands steadier than she felt. The key slid into the lock smoothly, turning with a click that sounded deafening in the quiet vault. She pulled the long metal drawer free and stood, carrying it to a small table Hutchins indicated. I'll give you privacy, the bank manager said, retreating toward the vault door. Take your time. Just, please, make this quick. My wife thinks I'm at the gym. He left, and Victoria heard the vault door swing partially closed, giving them the illusion of privacy, if not the reality. Minjun moved to stand beside her, and together they looked down at the safety deposit box that might contain $50 million in bearer bonds, or might contain nothing. Victoria lifted the lid. Inside were papers. Lots of papers. Bearer bonds, just as promised. Thick certificates printed on heavy stock, each one representing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Victoria's hands shook as she picked them up, fanning through them. 10 bonds, 20, 30. She stopped counting at 45, her mind unable to process the sheer magnitude of wealth she was holding. It's all here, she whispered. Minjun, it's all here. But Minjun wasn't looking at the bonds. He was staring at something else in the box. A manila envelope, old and yellowed, with Chinese characters written across the front in faded ink. What is that? Victoria asked. He picked it up carefully, turning it over. The back was sealed with wax that had cracked with age, and when Minjun broke it open, photographs spilled across the table. Black and white photographs, decades old, showing men in suits standing outside what looked like a warehouse. One of the men was clearly a younger Richard Blackwood, still dark-haired, arrogant-looking, maybe in his 30s. The others were Asian, and in the center of the group stood an older man with white hair and a commanding presence. Chen Wei, Minjun said quietly, pointing to the white-haired man. David Chen's grandfather, one of the founding members of the Wo-Shing-Wo triad. Victoria's stomach dropped. Richard knew them. He knew David's family. More than knew them, he worked with them. Minjun flipped through the other photographs. More meetings, handshakes, money changing hands. This goes back 50 years, Victoria. Whatever Richard was involved in, it started long before you were born. There was more in the envelope. Documents in Chinese that Victoria couldn't read but Minjun could, his expression growing darker with each page. A ledger showing transactions that spanned decades. Names, dates, amounts that made the $50 million in bearer bonds look like pocket change. This is it, Minjun said finally. This is Richard's insurance policy. Proof of every transaction, every deal, every crime committed by the Wo-Shing-Wo and their associates for half a century. He looked at Victoria with something approaching awe. Do you understand what this means? This isn't just about the bonds. This is leverage against one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Asia. And Richard gave it to me, Victoria said, the implications crashing over her like a wave. He gave me the ammunition to destroy them, or to negotiate with them. Minjun carefully gathered the photographs and documents, returning them to the envelope. The question is, why? Why would Richard give you this power? What did he think you'd do with it? Victoria thought back to those final days. Richard weak and dying, his children circling like vultures. The way he'd looked at her when he gave her the key. The strange intensity in his eyes. Remember where we met, he'd said. and then so quietly she'd almost missed it. Protect our daughter. Our daughter. Not your daughter. Our. Oh God, Victoria breathed. Min-jun, what if? Her phone buzzed before she could finish the thought. Another message from the unknown number. This time the image was different. Not Lucia in the white room, but a split screen. On one side, Lucia playing with her rabbit. On the other, a man sitting in what looked like a concrete cell, his face bruised and bloodied, but unmistakable. David Chen, alive, captive, staring at the camera with hollow eyes. The text beneath read, "Plot twist, Sarah. We have your husband too. Both your husbands, actually, if we count the dead one. The price just went up. Bonds plus documents equals both Chen and your daughter. You have 36 hours, clock's ticking." Victoria's hands went numb, the phone nearly slipping from her grip. David was alive. The man she'd fled from, the man who'd broken her arm and threatened her life, the man she'd spent 3 years believing was dead. He was alive and in the hands of the same people who had Lucia. "They have him," she said, her voice distant and strange. "They have David." Min-jun took the phone, studying the image with professional detachment. "They've had him for a while. Those injuries are days old, maybe weeks. He's been their prisoner and now they're using him as leverage. But why? Why would they kidnap him and then offer to trade him back to me? I don't want him back. I never wanted to see him again. Because they think you do, or because they think we need him for something." Min-jun's eyes narrowed. "Or because they're not actually planning to give anyone back. They're just stacking up promises to ensure you deliver the bonds and the documents." The cynicism in his voice was probably warranted, but Victoria couldn't help the small spark of hope that flickered in her chest. If David was alive and they could somehow rescue him along with Lucia, didn't that give them more options? More leverage? Couldn't they use David as a bargaining chip the way the Triad was using him? "What are you thinking?" Min-jun asked, reading her expression. "I'm thinking that if we can get David back, we can use him. Make him tell us everything he knows about the Woshingwo's operations. Use that information to negotiate or to destroy them. Or he could betray us the moment we free him," Min-jun interrupted. "Victoria, David Chen broke your arm and threatened to kill you. He's not going to suddenly become an ally just because we rescue him from his own organization. I know that, but we don't have to trust him. We just have to use him." Victoria picked up the envelope full of documents, weighing it in her hands. These documents prove decades of criminal activity. If we combine that with David's testimony, with insider knowledge of current operations, we could bring down the entire organization, Min-jun finished, seeing where she was going. "Cut off the head of the snake." "Exactly. It's risky. Everything we're doing is risky." Victoria started gathering the bearer bonds, stacking them carefully. "But this gives us a chance. A real chance to not just survive this, but to end it. To make sure Lucia never has to look over her shoulder, never has to run like I did." Min-jun was silent for a long moment, his tactical mind working through scenarios. Finally, he nodded. "All right, we go in as planned. Make the exchange, get Lucia and David. But the moment we have them, we disappear. We don't try to be heroes. We take what's ours and we run. And the documents? We keep them. Insurance. If the Wo comes after us again, we release everything to law enforcement agencies worldwide. Interpol, FBI, everyone." Min-jun's smile was sharp and dangerous. "Mutually assured destruction. They leave us alone, or we burn their entire operation to the ground." It was a plan. Not a good plan, not a safe plan, but a plan nonetheless. Victoria carefully placed the bonds and documents into a leather satchel Hutchins had provided. The weight of $50 million and 50 years of criminal history, surprisingly manageable. They emerged from the vault to find Hutchins pacing nervously in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear. He disconnected quickly when he saw them, his face pale. "Is everything all right, Mr. Hutchins?" Min-jun asked, his tone suggesting the question was purely rhetorical. "Yes, fine. I was just... My wife was wondering..." He trailed off, clearly lying. "Did you find what you needed?" "We did. Thank you for your assistance. Minjun moved toward the stairs and Victoria followed, the satchel clutched tight against her chest. They were halfway up the stairs when Victoria heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Footsteps, multiple footsteps, coming from the lobby above them. She grabbed Minjun's arm, and he'd already heard it too, his hand moving to the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Back door? He asked Hutchins, who'd frozen behind them. There's no back door. This is the only way out except for the emergency exit. But that's alarmed and where? Through the vault, past the safety deposit boxes, there's a door marked emergency exit only. But if you open it, Minjun was already moving back down the stairs, pulling Victoria with him. Open the vault, now! Hutchins fumbled with the combination, his hands shaking so badly he had to try twice. Above them, Victoria heard voices, commands being shouted in what sounded like Russian, the same accent as the men who'd attacked Blackwood Manor. The vault door swung open and they rushed through, Minjun scanning for the emergency exit. He found it at the far end of the room, a steel door painted the same institutional gray as the walls, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. It opens into an alley behind the building, Hutchins said, his voice high with panic. But the alarm will bring police. Good. Minjun pulled Victoria toward the door. Mr. Hutchins, I suggest you lock yourself in the vault and don't come out until you hear sirens. And remember, you were never here. You opened the bank for routine weekend maintenance and found intruders. Understand? Hutchins nodded frantically, already backing toward the vault door. Minjun pushed the emergency exit open, and immediately a piercing alarm shrieked through the building. They burst into a narrow alley that smelled of garbage and standing water, the pre-dawn light barely penetrating the space between buildings. Which way? Victoria gasped, running despite her injured ankle, sending spikes of pain up her leg. Away from the street, they'll have people covering the main exits. Minjun was already moving, pulling her deeper into the alley network that connected Lower Manhattan's oldest buildings. Behind them, she heard the emergency door slam open again, heard shouting in Russian. They ran. Victoria's lungs burned, and her ankle screamed protest. But Minjun's hand on hers kept her moving. They twisted through alleys, climbed over dumpsters, squeezed through gaps between buildings that seemed too narrow for human passage. The satchel banged against Victoria's hip with each step, $50 million becoming dead weight that threatened to drag her down. Gunfire cracked behind them, bullets sparking off brick walls. Minjun returned fire without looking back, his shots carefully placed to slow pursuit rather than kill. They couldn't afford bodies, not yet, not with police sirens already wailing in the distance. They emerged onto a broader street, and Minjun immediately pulled Victoria into a recessed doorway. Stay here. Don't move. Where are you? He was already gone, running across the street toward a parked car. Victoria watched in horror as he smashed the driver's side window with his elbow, reached in, and hot-wired the vehicle with practiced efficiency. The engine roared to life just as their pursuers rounded the corner behind them. Minjun pulled the car up to where Victoria was hidden, throwing open the passenger door. Get in! She dove into the seat, the satchel clutched to her chest, and Minjun was accelerating before she'd even closed the door. Bullets punched through the rear windshield, glass exploding inward, and Victoria ducked low as Minjun wove through early morning traffic with controlled recklessness. Are you hit? He demanded, his eyes flicking between the road and her. No, I'm fine. Minjun, they knew we'd be at the bank. Hutchins, Minjun said grimly. He called someone while we were in the vault. Probably took money to tip them off about our location. But your daughter's scholarship means nothing compared to what the Wo Xing Wo probably offered him. Minjun took a hard turn, the stolen car's tires squealing. Everyone has a price, Victoria. Everyone. And we just learned that ours is apparently higher than a college education. Behind them, 2 black SUVs had joined the chase, weaving through traffic with the same aggressive precision Minjun was using. This wasn't random violence anymore. This was professional pursuit, the kind that ended with someone dead in an alley. We need to get off the streets, Victoria said, watching the SUVs gain ground. They're going to run us down or shoot us, and either way, I know. Minjun pulled out his phone, somehow managing to dial while driving at speeds that made Victoria close her eyes. Jay, Where are you? Victoria couldn't hear the response, but Min Jun's expression lightened slightly. Brooklyn Bridge. Meet us at the south entrance in 3 minutes. He disconnected, taking another hard turn that sent Victoria sliding across the seat. Hold on. What followed was the most terrifying 3 minutes of Victoria's life. Min Jun drove like he was trying to qualify for a racing team, using every gap in traffic, every shortcut, every illegal maneuver that might buy them seconds. The pursuing SUVs kept pace, and Victoria saw muzzle flashes from the passenger windows as they opened fire. A bullet punched through the windshield inches from Min Jun's head, spiderwebbing the glass. He didn't flinch, didn't slow, just kept driving with the focused intensity of someone who'd done this before and would do it again. They hit the Brooklyn Bridge approach doing 70, and Victoria saw Jay's Mercedes waiting exactly where Min Jun had specified. Min Jun didn't slow down. He accelerated, pulling alongside the Mercedes and screaming, "Now!" Jay yanked his wheel hard, and the Mercedes slammed into their stolen car with enough force to send it careening into the path of the pursuing SUVs. Victoria heard the crunch of metal on metal, the scream of brakes, and then Min Jun was pulling her from the wreckage through the driver's side door. They dove into the back of Jay's Mercedes, and the driver was moving before they'd even closed the doors. Behind them, the stolen car and one of the SUVs were locked together in a tangled mess of smoking metal. The second SUV tried to navigate around the wreckage and got clipped by a delivery truck, spinning out and blocking 2 lanes of traffic. "Nice driving," Min Jun said, settling into his seat like they'd just completed a leisurely Sunday drive rather than a high-speed chase through Manhattan. "Thank you, sir." Jay's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, checking on Victoria. "Mrs. Kang, are you injured?" "I'm fine," Victoria said automatically, though she could feel bruises forming where the satchel had been slamming into her ribs. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," Min Jun said. "Somewhere they won't find us while we figure out our next move." "They knew about the bank," Victoria said, "which means they probably know about the safe house. They probably know about all your properties. They know about the properties registered in my name. But I have other locations, places that exist only on paper, owned by shell companies and holding corporations that can't be traced back to me." Min Jun pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like a list of addresses. "There, Red Hook, industrial area, mostly abandoned warehouses. I own a building there through a subsidiary of a subsidiary. No one knows about it except Jay and my attorney. And your attorney is currently in Seoul and knows better than to betray me." Min Jun's smile was cold. "Besides, his family's well-being depends on his discretion. He's motivated to keep his mouth shut." They drove in silence for a while, leaving Manhattan behind and crossing into Brooklyn. Victoria watched the city slide past, familiar landmarks taking on a sinister quality now that she knew enemies were everywhere. How many of the cars around them belonged to the Wo? How many pedestrians were actually spotters, reporting their position? Paranoia was usually dismissed as mental illness, but Victoria was beginning to understand that sometimes paranoia was just heightened awareness of actual threats. The Red Hook warehouse was exactly as Min Jun had described. Abandoned-looking, covered in graffiti, surrounded by similar buildings in various states of decay. Jay pulled into a loading bay, and Min Jun used a key card to activate a rolling door that looked rusty and non-functional, but operated smoothly once unlocked. Inside, the warehouse was transformed. Clean, climate-controlled, furnished like a luxury apartment hidden inside industrial camouflage. There were bedrooms, a full kitchen, what looked like a command center with multiple computer screens, and, Victoria noticed with growing unease, an armory that would make most small nations jealous. "Welcome to my panic room," Min Jun said, helping her out of the car. "Everything we need to survive a siege, plan an assault, or disappear completely. Take your pick." Victoria set the satchel down on a table, her arms aching from clutching it so tightly. Inside were the bonds and documents that had already nearly gotten them killed twice, the key to their daughter's freedom and possibly their own deaths. "We have 34 hours, she said, checking the countdown that had burned itself into her consciousness. 34 hours to figure out how to make an exchange without getting killed, rescue David Chen without getting betrayed, and somehow use all of this to neutralize the Wo permanently. So basically, Minjun said, moving to the command center and booting up the computers. A typical Tuesday in my world. Despite everything, the terror, the exhaustion, the impossible odds, Victoria felt a smile tug at her lips. Is this really your life? Running from international criminal organizations and stealing cars and jumping through windows? Sometimes there's also paperwork. Minjun pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her from behind as they both stared at the satchel. But mostly, yes. This is what I do. This is who I am. He pressed his lips to her temple. Are you sure you want this life, Victoria? Because there's still time to walk away. I can get Lucia back, get you both into witness protection, set you up somewhere safe and far from all of this. Victoria leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. And you? I'd have to stay behind. Deal with the consequences. Make sure you are never found. So you're offering to sacrifice yourself so I can run away. Again. Victoria turned in his arms, looking up at him. That's your grand solution? It's the safest solution. It's also the loneliest solution. Victoria cupped his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. I've run before, Minjun. I've hidden and changed my name and built new lives from nothing. And you know what? I'm tired. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting other people control my life through fear. Victoria, my daughter is out there, she said fiercely. Our daughter. And I will walk through fire to get her back. But I won't do it alone, and I won't do it by running. We end this. Together. We get Lucia, we use these documents to destroy the Woxingwo, and we build a life where our daughter never has to hide who she is or where she comes from. Minjun stared at her for a long moment, and Victoria saw something shift in his expression. Pride, maybe, or recognition that the frightened woman he'd married 18 months ago had been forged into something harder, something dangerous. Together, he agreed finally, we end this together. The command center came alive under Minjun's hands, screens flickering to life and displaying information that Victoria could only partially understand. Maps, surveillance feeds, encrypted communications, all the infrastructure of a man who lived in the shadows and thrived there. First priority, Minjun said, his fingers flying across keyboards, is figuring out where they're holding Lucia and David. The white room in the video has no identifying features, but we can analyze the lighting, the acoustics, any ambient sounds that might give us a location. Victoria moved closer to the screens, watching as he pulled up the video message and began running it through various filters. What are you looking for? Anything. Air conditioning units, traffic noise, even the quality of the cellular signal used to send the message can tell us something about geographic location. He isolated a section of audio, amplifying it until Victoria could hear a faint rhythmic sound beneath Lucia's laughter. There. Hear that? She listened closely. It sounds like machinery? Industrial machinery. Specifically, it sounds like the kind of hydraulic press used in shipping container loading. Minjun pulled up another screen, this one showing a map of the New York metropolitan area with dozens of red dots scattered across it. These are all the locations within a 100-mile radius that have that specific type of equipment. Ports mostly. Some warehouses. That's still too many locations to search, Victoria said, feeling hope deflate. We don't have time to check all of them. No, but we can narrow it down. Minjun zoomed in on the map, eliminating locations one by one. They need somewhere isolated enough to hold prisoners without attracting attention, but connected enough to have good transportation links. They need power, running water, and probably internet connectivity for sending those videos. And they need it to be owned or controlled by someone connected to the Woxingwo. He pulled up another database, this one showing property records, corporate ownership structures, financial transactions that traced back through layers of shell companies. Victoria watched in fascination as he peeled back the layers, following money trails that would have taken law enforcement months to uncover. There, he said finally, highlighting 3 locations. These are all owned by subsidiaries of companies known to have ties to the Woxingwo. One in Newark, one in Red Hook, ironically only 2 miles from here, and one in Bayonne. How do we know which one? We checked them all, simultaneously. Minjun pulled out his phone, making a series of rapid calls in Korean. Victoria heard him giving coordinates, issuing orders, coordinating what sounded like a small army. When he finished, he turned to her with grim satisfaction. I have teams en route to all 3 locations. They'll do reconnaissance, identify which one is being used, and report back within the hour. And then we plan the extraction, get Lucia and David out, secure the bonds and documents, and leverage everything we have to negotiate our permanent freedom from the Wo Xing Wo. He said it like it was simple, like they weren't talking about assaulting a fortified position held by professional criminals who'd already demonstrated their willingness to kill. Victoria moved to the armory, studying the weapons with a mixture of fascination and dread. Pistols, rifles, body armor, everything needed to wage a small war. You're planning a raid. I'm planning a rescue operation. The violence is just inevitable collateral. Minjun, Victoria turned to face him. These are trained killers. Your people might be good, but the Woxing Wo has been doing this for generations. What makes you think we can win? Because they think we're desperate and afraid. They think we'll walk into their trap, hand over the bonds and documents, and hope they keep their word. Minjun's smile was sharp and predatory. But we're not going to do that. We're going to hit them hard, fast, and from a direction they're not expecting. We're going to take what's ours and burn their operation to the ground on the way out. And if something goes wrong, then we improvise. He moved to stand in front of her, his hands settling on her shoulders. Victoria, I need you to understand something. The moment we committed to this course of action, the moment we decided to fight instead of run, we accepted that we might not survive, but our daughter will. Whatever happens, whatever it costs, Lucia will be safe. That's the promise I'm making you. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Don't talk like you're planning to sacrifice yourself. I'm planning to do whatever is necessary. His thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away a tear that had escaped. But I'd much prefer to survive this and grow old with you. Take Lucia to her first day of school, teach her to ride a bike, embarrass her when she brings home her first boyfriend. His voice softened. I want all of that, Victoria. I want the future we were robbed of when we had to hide her existence, when we had to pretend our marriage was just an arrangement. I want to be her father in more than just biology. You are her father, Victoria said fiercely. Biology is just DNA. You've protected her from the moment you knew she existed. You've kept us safe, given us a life, been willing to die for us. That's what makes you her father. Minjun pulled her close, and they stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. Victoria could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, steady and strong, and she tried to memorize this feeling. This sense of being safe in the arms of someone dangerous enough to protect her. His phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He answered it, listened, and disconnected with a sharp nod. Red Hook location. My team confirmed activity. At least a dozen guards, rotating patrols, serious security setup. That's where they're holding them. 2 miles away, Victoria said, the irony not lost on her. We've been that close this whole time, which is probably deliberate. They wanted us nearby, wanted us to feel the weight of proximity. Minjun moved back to the command center, pulling up detailed schematics of the Red Hook facility. It's an old shipping warehouse, mostly abandoned except for the section they're using. 3-story building, reinforced concrete, limited entry points. Victoria studied the layout, her nurse's training automatically assessing it like a trauma case, identifying the critical points, the vulnerable areas, the places where things could go catastrophically wrong. How do we get in without alerting them? We don't. We use the alert as a diversion. Minjun began sketching out a plan, his tactical mind working through scenarios. We hit the front entrance hard and loud, make them think we're launching a full assault. While they're focused on that, a smaller team goes in through the roof access here. He pointed to a spot on the schematic. That team finds Lucia and David, extracts them, and gets them to safety. The assault team holds position long enough to ensure the extraction is successful. Then we all disappear before law enforcement arrives. You make it sound so simple. It's not. There are 100 ways this goes wrong, but the alternative is walking into their trap and hoping for mercy from people who've never shown any. Minjun looked at her, and Victoria saw the question he was trying not to ask. I need to know if you can do this, if you can potentially kill someone to protect our daughter. Because once we start, there's no going back. Victoria thought about Lucia's face, about her daughter's laughter, about the way she'd called out mommy coming in that video. She thought about David and the years she'd spent running from him, the fear that had dominated her life. She thought about Richard and his manipulations, Marcus and Diane's cruelty, the endless parade of people who'd tried to use her, control her, break her. I can do it, she said and meant it. Whatever it takes. Minjun nodded and Victoria saw approval in his eyes. Not pleasure. He wasn't happy about what she was becoming, but recognition that sometimes survival required transformation into something harder, something capable of violence. We move at dusk, he said. That gives us 6 hours to prepare, brief the teams, and position everyone. In the meantime, you should rest. Eat something. You'll need your strength. Victoria knew he was right, but the thought of sleeping while Lucia was 2 miles away in the hands of killers made her want to scream. Still, exhaustion was a weapon their enemies could use against them, and she forced herself to nod. Minjun led her to one of the bedrooms, surprisingly comfortable despite the industrial setting, with a real bed and blackout curtains that turned the space into a cave. I'll wake you in 4 hours, he said. That's all we can spare. Will you sleep too? After you, someone needs to coordinate the teams. He kissed her forehead, a gesture so gentle it nearly broke her heart. Rest, Victoria. Dream of the life we'll have when this is over. She tried. She lay in the darkness and closed her eyes and attempted to summon images of a peaceful future. Lucia laughing in a park, Minjun teaching their daughter to swim, family dinners and bedtime stories, and all the mundane miracles of normal life. But her mind kept returning to the white room, to David's beaten face, to the countdown timer that was still ticking away in her consciousness. 29 hours and 42 minutes remaining. Eventually, exhaustion won, and Victoria slipped into fitful sleep, her dreams a chaotic mix of memory and nightmare. She was running through Blackwood Manor while it burned, searching for Lucia in rooms that kept multiplying. She was back in Hong Kong, David's hand around her throat, his voice promising death if she ever tried to leave. She was in the hospital watching Richard die, his final words changing each time. Protect our daughter. Remember where we met. They're coming for you. Run. She woke to Minjun shaking her shoulder gently, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his phone screen. Time to move. Victoria sat up, her body protesting. 4 hours of sleep wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it would have to do. She followed Minjun back to the command center, where Jay and 3 other men she didn't recognize were studying the warehouse schematics. This is Victor, Chang, and Marcus, Minjun said, introducing the men. Victor was Eastern European, built like a tank, with cold blue eyes that assessed Victoria with professional detachment. Chang was Chinese, lean and quick-looking, with the kind of stillness that suggested coiled violence. The other Marcus, not to be confused with Diane's brother, was Korean-American, young and intense, with visible tattoos creeping up his neck. They're my best, Minjun continued. Victor specializes in breaching and close-quarters combat. Chang is our extraction specialist. If there's a way out, he'll find it. Marcus handles communications and technical support. Ma'am, they each said in turn, and Victoria realized with a start that they were showing her respect. Not because she was Minjun's wife, though that probably helped, but because she was about to go into danger alongside them. She was becoming part of their world, whether she'd intended to or not. The plan, Minjun said, redirecting everyone's attention to the screens, is a 2-pronged assault. Victor, Chong, and I will form the primary extraction team. We go in through the roof access, locate the targets, and get them out. Jay and Marcus coordinate from here, monitoring communications and running interference if law enforcement gets involved. What about me? Victoria asked. Minjun hesitated and she saw him weighing options. Finally, you're with the extraction team. We might need someone Lucia recognizes, someone who can keep her calm during the escape. And if David tries anything, I'll handle him, Victoria finished. She'd spent 3 years running from David Chen. It was time to face him, and this time she wouldn't be the one running scared. They spent the next hour going over the plan in excruciating detail. Entry points, extraction routes, fallback positions, emergency protocols. Minjun's operation had the precision of a military assault, and Victoria found herself grateful for his experience even as she wondered how many times he'd done something like this before. As dusk began to fall over Brooklyn, painting the industrial landscape in shades of orange and purple, they geared up. Body armor that was surprisingly lightweight, communications equipment that fit nearly invisibly in her ear, a compact weapon that Minjun showed her how to use with patient efficiency. "Safety here, point and squeeze, aim for center mass," he repeated, the same instructions from before. "If you have to shoot, don't hesitate. Hesitation gets people killed." Victoria nodded, accepting the weight of the weapon in her hands. She was past the point of moral qualms, past the point of worrying about who she was becoming. All that mattered was Lucia, and she would burn the world down to get her daughter back. They loaded into 2 vehicles, a nondescript van for the assault team and Jay's Mercedes as backup. The drive to Red Hook took 15 minutes that felt like 15 hours, Victoria's nerves winding tighter with each passing block. The warehouse came into view, 3 stories of concrete and steel, windows mostly broken or boarded over, the kind of place that screamed abandonment to anyone who didn't look closely. But Victoria could see the signs of recent activity: fresh tire tracks in the gravel parking area, security cameras mounted on poles, the faint glow of lights from interior rooms. Thermal imaging shows at least 15 heat signatures inside. Marcus's voice came through their earpieces. 12 on the ground floor, 2 on the second, 1 on the third. The lone signature on the 3rd floor is smaller, likely a child. Lucia. Victoria's heart clenched. Her daughter was in there, probably scared and confused, waiting for a mother who was about to walk into hell to get her back. "The 2nd floor signatures are in what looks like a holding cell," Marcus continued. "Probably your other target. David, also waiting." Victoria wondered what he was thinking, if he knew she was coming, if he'd even want to be rescued by the wife who'd stolen from him and fled. Minjun parked the van 2 blocks away, in the shadow of another abandoned building. "We go in silent until we're compromised. Once they know we're there, we move fast and we don't stop." Questions? No one had any. They'd all done this before, Victoria realized. This was their normal. Walking into danger with calm professionalism, treating potential death like just another day at the office. "Mrs. Kang," Victor said, his accent thick but his English clear, "stay behind me. I am largest target. Bullets will hit me first. When we reach the 3rd floor, you go to child. We will handle guards." The casual way he discussed being shot was almost more disturbing than the plan itself. But Victoria nodded, accepting that this was how these men operated. They were weapons Minjun aimed at problems, and right now their problem was a building full of criminals who'd stolen a child. They approached the warehouse from the rear, moving through shadows with practiced stealth. The roof access was a rusted fire escape that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. But when Chung tested it, the structure held firm. Someone had reinforced it recently, probably for exactly this kind of approach. They climbed in silence, Victoria's injured ankle protesting but functional. At the roof level, Chung produced what looked like a professional lock-picking set and went to work on the access door. 30 seconds later, they were inside, descending a stairwell that smelled of mold and old concrete. The 3rd floor was dark, lit only by emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of red. Minjun moved forward with Victor, their weapons raised, clearing corners with the efficiency of people who'd trained together extensively. Victoria stayed close behind, her own weapon feeling both too heavy and too light in her hands. They found the room halfway down a corridor, a heavy door with an industrial lock, light spilling from the gap underneath. Minjun motioned for them to stop, pressed his ear to the door, listening. Victoria heard it then, Lucia's voice, singing softly to herself. Some children's song about stars, one Victoria had sung to her 1,000 times. The sound of her daughter's voice, so close after so many hours of fear, nearly broke Victoria's composure. Minjun looked at her, and she saw the same emotion reflected in his eyes. Their daughter was on the other side of that door, 10 feet away, 30 seconds from being back in their arms. He nodded to Victor, who positioned himself to breach the door. Chang readied a flashbang grenade. Minjun's finger hovered over the trigger of his weapon. and Victoria prepared to see her daughter for the first time in 3 days that felt like 3 years. "On three," Minjun whispered. "One, two." The lights went out. Complete darkness. The kind that was absolute and disorienting. Victoria heard Minjun curse in Korean, heard Victor shifting position, heard Chang's breathing change as he adapted to the new situation. "Marcus," Minjun said into his comm. "What happened?" Static. Then Marcus's voice, distorted and urgent. "They cut the power. Ground floor team is moving. You're compromised. Abort, abort, The communication cut off with a burst of interference that made Victoria wince. They were alone in the dark, in enemy territory, with Lucia 10 feet away behind a locked door. "Change of plans," Minjun said, his voice deadly calm. "Victor, breach the door now. Chang, cover R6. Victoria, when that door opens, you go straight to Lucia and you don't stop moving. Understood?" "Understood." Victor didn't need explosives. He simply kicked the door with enough force to tear it from its reinforced hinges, and suddenly the white room from the videos was right there in front of them. Lucia was huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with terror, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When she saw Victoria, her face transformed. "Mommy!" Victoria was moving before conscious thought, crossing the room in 3 strides and scooping her daughter into her arms. Lucia was solid and warm and real, her small body trembling as she buried her face in Victoria's neck. "I've got you, baby," Victoria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy's got you. You're safe now." Behind her, she heard gunfire. Minjun and Victor, engaging targets she couldn't see in the darkness. Muzzle flashes lit the corridor like strobes, revealing glimpses of men in tactical gear, of bullets tearing through walls, of violence unfolding at close quarters. "Go!" Minjun shouted. "Chang, take them!" Chang was beside her immediately, his hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward an exit she couldn't see. They moved through darkness while chaos erupted behind them. Lucia's arms locked around Victoria's neck so tight it was almost painful. They reached a stairwell, different from the one they'd used to enter, and Chang was urging her down, toward the ground floor and hopefully an exit. Behind them, the gunfire intensified, and Victoria heard Minjun's voice shouting something in Korean that sounded like orders. They burst out into the parking area, and Victoria saw Jay's Mercedes already moving toward them. The back door flew open and Chang practically threw her inside, diving in after her. "Where's Minjun?" Victoria demanded, looking back at the warehouse. "Coming," Jay said, but his tone suggested he wasn't certain. "Marcus, status?" No response. Just static. The warehouse erupted in flames. Not a single explosion. Multiple, coordinated detonations that turned the top 2 floors into an inferno. Victoria screamed, Lucia crying against her chest, as fire blossomed from windows and consumed the building where Minjun had been 30 seconds ago. "No," Victoria whispered. "No, no, no!" A figure burst from the warehouse entrance, moving fast despite the flames licking at his heels. Victor, his body armor smoking, bleeding from a dozen places, but somehow still upright. He reached the car and collapsed against it, gasping. "Kang?" Jay asked. Victor shook his head. "Sealed on 2nd floor. Chen 2. Building came down. There..." He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Victoria stared at the burning warehouse, at the inferno that had consumed the man she loved, and felt something inside her break. Minjun was gone. Dead. Burned alive in a building rigged to explode the moment they'd breached. They'd walked into a trap after all. Lucia's sobs were the only sound in the Mercedes as Jay drove them away from the burning warehouse, away from the man who'd promised to bring them all home safely. Victoria held her daughter with mechanical numbness, her mind refusing to process what had just happened. Minjun couldn't be dead. He was too smart, too prepared, too ruthlessly efficient to die in a trap he should have seen coming. But the warehouse was an inferno behind them, fire consuming 3 stories of concrete and steel, and no one could survive that. Not even Minjun Kang. "Mrs. Kang," Victor said from the front seat, his voice thick with pain and something that might have been grief. "I'm sorry. He ordered me to take you and the child. Said if it came down to choice, we save the daughter first. Always the daughter first." Victoria couldn't respond, couldn't speak past the crushing weight in her chest. She told Minjun they would end this together, that she wouldn't let him sacrifice himself. And he'd agreed, had looked her in the eyes and promised they'd survive. But he'd lied. Or maybe he'd always known it would end this way, and he'd simply decided that her survival and Lucia's were worth more than his own life. "Where we go?" Jay asked, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Victoria had never heard his accent so thick, stress breaking through his usual precise English. "Safe house," Victor said. "The one in Greenwich is compromised but has medical supplies, weapons. We need both." Lucia had finally stopped crying, her small body going limp with exhaustion against Victoria's chest. Victoria stroked her daughter's curls, so much like her own, but with Min Jun's texture, his stubborn waves, and felt tears she didn't remember shedding cooling on her face. "Mommy," Lucia whispered. "Where, Daddy?" The question broke something in Victoria that she'd been trying to hold together. How did you tell a 2-year-old that her father was dead? How did you explain that the man who'd protected them, who'd loved them both with a fierce devotion that transcended biology, was gone? Daddy had to stay behind, baby," Victoria managed. "But he made sure we got out. He saved us." "Daddy come back?" Victoria closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling over. "I don't know," but she did know. Had seen the building explode, had watched Victor emerge alone, had heard the finality in his voice when he'd said they were sealed on the second floor. Minjun was gone, and no amount of hoping would bring him back. The safe house felt different now, less like a fortress and more like a tomb. Jay helped Victor inside, the large man's injuries worse than he'd initially let on. Bullet wounds, burns. What looked like a piece of shrapnel embedded in his shoulder. Victoria knew she should help. Her nursing training hadn't disappeared just because her world had ended, but she couldn't seem to make her body move beyond holding Lucia. "Mrs. Kang," Jay's voice gentle but firm, "the child needs to be checked. Make sure she wasn't hurt." Right. Lucia. Her daughter had just spent 3 days as a hostage, had been used as leverage by killers, had been in a building that exploded. Victoria needed to examine her, make sure she was physically unharmed, even if the psychological damage would take years to assess. She carried Lucia to one of the bedrooms, laying her gently on the bed. "Baby, I need to check you over, okay? Make sure you're not hurt anywhere." Lucia nodded, too exhausted to protest. Victoria went through the examination with practiced efficiency, checking for injuries, bruises, signs of abuse. Her daughter was remarkably unharmed, some dehydration, a few minor scrapes, but nothing serious. They'd kept her fed, clean, relatively comfortable. Small mercies in a nightmare situation. "Were they mean to you?" Victoria asked, trying to keep her voice calm despite the rage building in her chest. "Did anyone hurt you?" "No hurt," Lucia said. "Scary men, but they give me food. Give me Mr. Rabbit." She held up the stuffed animal she'd been clutching. "They say Mommy coming soon. They right." Victoria pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. They'd even bathed her, maintained the pretense of care while using her as bait. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry this happened to you." "Not your fault," Lucia said with the simple certainty of a child. Then in the way children do, shifting topics without transition. "I'm hungry. Can I have mac and cheese?" The request was so normal, so mundane in the midst of catastrophe, that Victoria almost laughed. Or maybe she was crying again. She couldn't tell anymore. "Let me see what we have in the kitchen." She found Jay already preparing food, instant ramen, rice, whatever could be made quickly from the safe house's emergency supplies. He looked up when she entered, and Victoria saw her own grief reflected in his face. "How long did you work for him?" she asked. 8 years, since I was 23. Jay's hands moved automatically, preparing the food with the same efficiency he brought to driving. "He saved my life. I owed him everything." "Tell me." Jay was silent for a moment then. "I was nobody, street kid in Seoul, running with wrong people, got in debt to worse people. They were going to kill me, make example." He poured boiling water over noodles. "Mr. Kang found me in alley, bleeding out. He could have walked past, should have walked past, but he stopped, took me to hospital, paid my debts, gave me job, gave me purpose. He was good at that, Victoria said softly, finding people who needed saving. He saved you too. Yes, multiple times. Victoria watched the steam rise from the ramen. Did he know? Did he know this was a trap? Jay's expression tightened. I think he suspected. But daughter was inside. He would walk into hell itself for you or the child. He did walk into hell, Victoria said, and he didn't walk back out. They ate in silence, Victoria forcing food down despite having no appetite. Lucia devoured her ramen with the enthusiasm of a child who didn't understand that their world had just ended. Victor emerged from his room, his wounds bandaged with the efficiency of someone who'd done field medicine many times, and joined them at the table. We need plan, he said without preamble. Wo will know extraction was successful. They will know we have the child. They will come for you. Let them come, Victoria said, and was surprised by the coldness in her own voice. Min Jun is dead. David is dead. The only thing I have left is Lucia, and I will kill anyone who tries to take her from me again. Victor studied her with something approaching approval. Good. Anger is useful. Grief comes later, when daughter is safe. He pulled out a tablet, bringing up maps and documents. But we need more than anger. We need strategy. The bonds, the documents. Where are they? Victoria realized with a start that she had no idea. The satchel had been in her hands when they entered the warehouse, but somewhere in the chaos of the explosion and the escape, she dropped it. I don't have them. Then we have nothing, Victor said. No leverage, no way to negotiate. Wo will hunt us until we are dead, or they are. The documents are backed up, Jay said quietly. Mr. Kang was paranoid about such things. He scanned everything, uploaded to secure server. I have access codes. And the bonds? Victoria asked. Worthless without the documents to prove their legitimacy, Victor said. Bearer bonds can be faked, but 50-year trail of criminal activity? That is real power. He looked at Victoria. We use documents, release them to authorities, to media, to everyone. Burn Wo to ground. That was always Min Jun's backup plan, Jay confirmed. If extraction failed, if we were compromised, he would release everything. Destroy them, even if it meant destroying himself. Then we do it, Victoria said. We finish what he started. We make sure his death meant something. It will put target on you forever, Victor warned. Wo does not forgive such betrayal. You will never be safe, never be anonymous. They will hunt you across continents, across decades. They're already hunting me. At least this way I fight back. Victoria stood, moving to the command center where Min Jun had spent so many hours coordinating their survival. The screens were dark now, but she knew how to bring them online, had watched him do it enough times. How do we access the files? Jay joined her, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced ease. Mr. Kang set up Dead Man's switch. If he doesn't check in every 24 hours, files release automatically to pre-selected recipients. FBI, Interpol, major news organizations. How long since his last check-in? 18 hours. Jay pulled up a countdown timer that made Victoria's stomach clench. In 6 hours, everything becomes public. The entire history of Wo operations, every name, every transaction, every crime. Organization will be destroyed, but so will everyone connected to it. Victoria thought about Richard, about his connection to the triad that went back 50 years, about the Blackwood family, about Marcus and Diane who'd betrayed her to these monsters, about David, sealed in that burning building, finally paying for his crimes. Let it burn, she said. All of it. Let the whole rotten structure collapse. You understand what this means? Victor asked. You will lose everything. Your identity, your safety, your ability to live normal life. You and daughter will be in witness protection, hiding forever. We're already hiding. At least this way, we'll be hiding from the ashes of the organization that destroyed our lives. Victoria looked at Lucia, sleeping peacefully on the couch now, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. My daughter deserves better than spending her life running from her mother's mistakes. If releasing these files means she grows up in a world where the Wo is scattered and broken, then that's what we do. Jay and Victor exchanged glances. Finally, Victor nodded. Mr. Kang chose well. You are strong enough for this. They spent the next hour preparing. Jay made copies of the files, ensuring that even if something happened to the main server, the information would still be released. Victor coordinated with what remained of Minjun's network, warning people who might be caught in the blast radius when the information went public. And Victoria sat with her sleeping daughter, memorizing her face, preparing for the life they were about to have. They'd be taken into protective custody once the files released. New names, new histories, new identities in some small town where no one would think to look for them. It would be a half-life, constrained and careful, but it would be life. And right now, that was enough. Mrs. Kang, Victor's voice interrupted her thoughts. Someone is at the perimeter. Victoria tensed immediately. Who? Unknown. Single individual. On foot. Approaching from the east. Victor was already moving to the armory, grabbing weapons. Could be scout for larger force. Or could be someone who needs help, Victoria said, though she didn't believe it. Not tonight. Not after everything. Jay pulled up the security cameras and they all crowded around the screen. The figure was moving slowly, limping badly, barely upright. As they watched, he collapsed against the exterior wall, sliding down to sit in the gravel. Zoom in, Victoria said, her heart suddenly hammering. The image sharpened and Victoria's world tilted. It was impossible. It was a hallucination born of grief and exhaustion. It couldn't be real. But it was. Minjun Kang sat against the wall of his own safe house, covered in soot and blood, his clothes burned and torn, barely conscious but unmistakably alive. Victoria was moving before conscious thought, running for the door despite Victor's shout of warning. She burst outside into the pre-dawn cold and fell to her knees beside him, her hands frantically checking for injuries even as her mind struggled to accept that he was here. He was real. He was alive. You're dead, she said stupidly. Victor said you were sealed on the second floor. The building exploded. You're supposed to be dead. Minjun's eyes opened, those dark, intense eyes that she'd thought she'd never see again. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a man who wasn't half dead from burns and smoke inhalation. Reports of my death, he rasped, were greatly exaggerated. How? Victoria was crying again, checking him over with hands that shook so badly she could barely function. How did you get out? Service tunnel, old shipping infrastructure. Found it while Victor was breaching door. He coughed and Victoria heard the rattle in his lungs that spoke of smoke inhalation. Got David out same way. He's alive. Barely. Left him 2 blocks away. Too heavy to carry further. David's alive too. The information was too much to process. Everyone was supposed to be dead, but apparently Minjun Kang didn't believe in staying dead. Stubborn bastard refused to burn, Minjun said, like someone else I know. His hand came up to cup her face, and Victoria realized he was checking her for injuries the same way she was checking him. Lucia? Inside, safe, unharmed. Victoria helped him stand, his arm heavy across her shoulders. Can you walk? I can crawl if necessary, as long as it's toward my daughter. They made it inside, Victor and Jay both staring like they'd seen a ghost. Minjun collapsed onto the couch beside sleeping Lucia, and his expression, the fierce love and relief that crossed his face, made Victoria start crying again. Thought I'd never see her again, he said softly, his burned fingers gently touching Lucia's curls. Thought I'd failed you both. You came back, Victoria said. That's all that matters. You came back to us. Always. He looked up at her. I will always come back to you, Victoria. No matter what it costs, no matter what I have to survive, I will always find my way back to you and our daughter. Lucia stirred, her eyes opening. For a moment, she just stared at Minjun, processing. Then she launched herself at him with a squeal of, Daddy! That made everyone in the room smile despite everything. Minjun caught her, wincing at the pain but holding her tight, and buried his face in her hair. I'm here, little one. Daddy's here. You smell funny, Lucia announced, like a fire. I was in a fire, Minjun said. But I'm okay now. Good, I don't like fires. Lucia settled against his chest with the absolute trust of a child who knew her father would protect her. Can we go home now? The question hung in the air. Home. They didn't have a home anymore. The safe houses were compromised, their identities burned, enemies closing in from all sides. In 6 hours, the files would release, and they'd become the most wanted people in several countries. Wanted for protection by some, wanted for revenge by others. Soon, Minjun promised, we'll find a new home, somewhere safe, somewhere far away from all of this. Will it have a garden? Lucia asked. With flowers? The biggest garden you've ever seen, Minjun said. And Victoria heard the promise underneath the words. He would give their daughter that garden, that safety, that normalcy, whatever it took. Boss, Victor interrupted quietly. The other one, Chen. You said you left him 2 blocks away? Minjun nodded. Southwest corner. Couldn't carry him further, but he was breathing. We need to retrieve him before someone else does. Why? Victoria asked. Why save him? After everything he did? Because he has information we need, and because watching him burn, Minjun's expression darkened. Some things you can't unsee. Even enemies don't deserve that death. Victor and Jay left to retrieve David, and Victoria found herself alone with Minjun and Lucia, this makeshift family that had been forged in violence and desperation. Lucia had fallen back asleep, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the last few days. Minjun was struggling to stay conscious, his body finally acknowledging the trauma it had endured. You need a hospital, Victoria said, her nurse's assessment kicking in. These burns are serious. You probably have smoke damage to your lungs. You could have internal injuries. I have the best nurse I've ever known right here, Minjun interrupted. And hospitals mean questions, records, involvement with authorities we can't afford right now. He caught her hand, holding it despite the pain moving must have caused. I trust you, Victoria. Fix me. So she did. She cleaned his burns with supplies from the safe house's extensive medical kit, administered antibiotics and pain medication, wrapped his injuries with the same careful precision she'd brought to caring for Richard Blackwood in his final days. Minjun endured it stoically, only occasional grimaces betraying the agony he must have been in. I thought you were dead, Victoria said as she worked, needing to say it out loud. I thought I'd lost you, and I realized that I never told you properly, that I never said it clearly enough. Said what? That I love you, not because you protect me, not because you saved Lucia, not because you're useful or powerful or dangerous. Victoria met his eyes, needing him to understand. I love you because of who you are underneath all of that, because you're gentle with our daughter, because you make terrible jokes when you're nervous, because you remembered my favorite tea and stocked every safe house with it. I love you, Minjun Kang, and I should have told you that before you walked into that building. Minjun's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I knew, I've always known, from the moment you chose to trust me, to let me help you, to build this life with me, I knew. He pulled her down for a kiss that tasted like smoke and survival. I love you too, more than I thought I could love anyone. You and Lucia are my entire world. They stayed like that for a moment, foreheads pressed together, breathing in sync. 2 people who'd been through hell and somehow made it out the other side. The door opened and Victor entered, supporting David Chen's unconscious weight. Jay followed, and together they laid David on a second couch. Victoria's ex-husband, her first husband technically, since their divorce had never been finalized, was in even worse shape than Minjun. Burns covered half his body, his face was swollen and bruised, and his breathing was shallow and labored. He needs a hospital, Victoria said automatically. So do you, boss, Victor said. But we go to hospital. Authorities get involved. Files release. We all become witnesses in international criminal investigation. Not ideal. Minjun struggled to sit up, his tactical mind already working through scenarios despite his injuries. We have 5 hours until the files release. We need to be somewhere secure when that happens. Somewhere law enforcement can find us quickly, but our enemies can't. FBI field office, Jay suggested. No. Too official. Too many questions before they provide protection. Minjun turned to Victoria. The agent, Morrison. The one who let us walk away from Blackwood Manor. You still have his card? Victoria did. She retrieved it from her pocket, the business card somehow still intact despite everything. You want to turn ourselves in? I want to negotiate. The files are releasing regardless. Morrison will have access to them along with everyone else. But if we're already in protective custody, already cooperating, we control the narrative. We're witnesses, not criminals. We're victims, not perpetrators. And David? Victoria looked at her ex-husband's broken body. What do we do about him? He's leverage, Minjun said simply. The Woxing Wo wants him. We have him. That gives us negotiating power even after the files release. You want to trade him? I want to ensure our safety. If that means using David Chen as a bargaining chip, so be it. Minjun's expression was cold, practical. He's a criminal, Victoria. He's hurt you, threatened you, put you in danger. I have no moral qualms about using him to protect our family. Victoria looked at David, really looked at him for the first time in 3 years. He looked smaller than she remembered, less imposing. Without consciousness to animate him, without the threat of violence in his eyes, he was just a man. Broken, burned, at the mercy of the people he'd once terrorized. Call Morrison, she said finally. Tell him we're coming in. Tell him we have evidence that will dismantle the Woxing Wo and we need protection. But we need medical attention first. Minjun made the call, and to his credit, Agent Morrison didn't ask too many questions. Just an address, a private clinic in Manhattan that had certain arrangements with federal law enforcement, and a promise that agents would meet them there. They loaded everyone into 2 vehicles, Victoria driving Jay's Mercedes with Lucia secured in a makeshift car seat. Minjun, despite his injuries, refused to be anywhere but the driver's seat of the van, with Victor and the unconscious David in the back. The drive into Manhattan as dawn broke over the city felt surreal. Here they were, running toward law enforcement instead of away from it, choosing exposure over secrecy, betting everything on the hope that Agent Morrison could be trusted and that the federal government's protection would be enough to keep them alive. The clinic was discreet, no signs, just a townhouse in the West Village that looked like any other wealthy person's residence. But when they arrived, Morrison was waiting with a medical team that moved with the efficiency of people used to treating witnesses who couldn't go to regular hospitals. Mrs. Kang, Morrison said, helping her out of the Mercedes. His eyes took in Lucia, still sleeping in her arms, and softened slightly. And this must be your daughter. Yes, she needs to be examined. And my husband, Minjun, he's badly injured. And David Chen is... She trailed off. He needs immediate medical attention, or he'll die. We'll take care of everyone, Morrison promised. But I need you to understand what's about to happen. He checked his watch. 4 hours and 17 minutes. Files containing 50 years of Woxing Wo criminal activity will be released to law enforcement agencies worldwide. When that happens, you and your family will become the most important witnesses in the biggest organized crime investigation in history. You'll be in protective custody indefinitely. New identities, relocation, constant security. Your lives as you knew them are over. They've been over for a while, Victoria said. We're just making it official. Morrison nodded, then looked past her to where Minjun was being helped from the van. Mr. Kang, I have to inform you that there are outstanding warrants for your arrest in several jurisdictions. Financial crimes mostly, some weapons charges. If you cooperate fully, testify about the Woxing Wo and their operations, I can probably get most of that reduced or dismissed. But I can't make promises. I understand, Minjun said. I'm willing to cooperate. I'm willing to testify. I'll give you everything you need to dismantle the organization. But my family, my wife and daughter, they get full protection. They get new identities and relocation far from any criminal networks. They get to disappear completely. Those are my terms. Done, Morrison said without hesitation. Get inside. Let's get you all patched up, and then we'll debrief. They spent the next 4 hours in the clinic being treated, questioned, and processed into the federal witness protection system. Victoria was examined and cleared, just bruising and exhaustion. Lucia was checked over more thoroughly and declared physically healthy, though the psychiatrist who evaluated her recommended trauma counseling. Minjun's injuries were serious. Second-degree burns over 15% of his body, smoke inhalation damage to his lungs, a fractured rib, and various lacerations, but nothing life-threatening with proper treatment. David Chen was in worse shape, requiring surgery and intensive care, but the doctors thought he'd survive. and at exactly 6:47 a.m., the files released. Victoria watched it happen in real time on the news feeds Morrison had pulled up in the secure room where they were being debriefed. Headlines exploding across every major outlet. Massive organized crime network exposed. 50 years of criminal activity revealed. International triad operations detailed in leaked documents. The Woshing Wo's entire operation laid bare for the world to see. Names, faces, accounts, crimes. Everything Richard Blackwood had meticulously documented over decades of involvement with the organization. Everything Min Jun had preserved and weaponized. Morrison's phone started ringing immediately and didn't stop for the next 3 hours. Interpol, FBI field offices across the country, international law enforcement agencies, everyone wanted to coordinate, to share information, to begin the massive undertaking of dismantling one of Asia's most powerful criminal organizations. "You did it," Morrison said to them during a brief break in the chaos. "You actually did it. We've been trying to build a case against the Woshing Wo for 20 years. You just handed us everything we needed in one package." "Richard Blackwood did it," Victoria corrected. "We just delivered it." "Why did he do it?" Morrison asked. Why would Blackwood turn on an organization he'd worked with for 50 years? Victoria thought about Richard in his final days, about the way he'd looked at Lucia with such strange intensity, about his last words, "Protect our daughter." "Because he wanted to make things right," she said finally, in the only way he knew how. By sunset, they had their new identities. Victoria Laurent became Sarah Matthews, Min Jun Kang became Daniel Park, and Lucia Moretti became Emma Park, a name that carried no history, no weight, no connection to the violence that had marked her first years of life. They would be relocating to a small town in Montana, of all places. Somewhere remote, somewhere safe, somewhere that Korean Mafia bosses and Chinese triads didn't typically operate. Min Jun would work as a consultant for a security firm, using his expertise without the criminal implications. Victoria would return to nursing, helping people the way she'd always wanted to. And Lucia would grow up in a place where her biggest concern was homework and making friends, not staying alive. "It's not the life I planned," Min Jun said that night, as they sat together in the safe room while Lucia slept between them. "I was going to give you everything, wealth, security, a place in my world." "I don't want your world," Victoria said. "I want you. I want our daughter to grow up safe. I want boring Sunday dinners and PTA meetings and arguments about bedtime. I want normal, Min Jun, and if that means living in Montana under assumed names, then that's what I want." He kissed her forehead, careful of his injuries. "Then that's what we'll have, a normal life starting tomorrow." But tomorrow would have to wait, because as they sat there in that safe room, exhausted and broken, but alive, Victoria's phone buzzed one final time. An unknown number, a message that made her blood run cold. A photograph of the clinic where they were hiding, taken from across the street, time-stamped 15 minutes ago. And beneath it, 2 words, "Found you." Victoria's hands went numb, the phone nearly slipping from her grasp. Min Jun saw her expression and immediately took the device, his face going hard as stone when he read the message. "Morrison," he said quietly, his voice carrying the deadly calm that meant someone was about to die. "We need Morrison, now." The agent appeared within seconds, his own weapon drawn at the tone in Min Jun's voice. He looked at the phone, and Victoria watched his professional mask crack for just a moment before reasserting itself. "How?" Morrison demanded. "This location is classified. Only 6 people in the bureau know you're here." "Then one of those 6 people is compromised," Min Jun said, "or someone in your agency has access they shouldn't. Either way, we're not safe here. We can move you. I have other facilities, which they'll find the same way they found this one." Min Jun was already standing despite his injuries, moving toward where Lucia slept. "We need to disappear, completely. Not through official channels, not through witness protection. We need to vanish in a way that leaves no digital footprint, no paper trail, nothing." "That's impossible in the modern world," Morrison said. "Everyone leaves traces." "Not everyone." Min Jun gently scooped up Lucia, who stirred but didn't wake. "I've been operating in shadows for 20 years, Agent Morrison. I know how to disappear. I just need you to give me a head start before you realize we're gone. Morrison stared at him for a long moment. If you run, you lose federal protection. You're on your own against every remnant of the Woshing Wo who survived today's exposure. And trust me, some of them will survive. They always do. I know, but at least this way, I control the variables. I choose where we hide, how we move, who we trust. Minjun looked at Victoria. If you're willing. Victoria thought about the life they'd been promised. Montana, assumed names, the illusion of normalcy. It had sounded good 12 hours ago, but someone had found them already, had penetrated federal security to locate a classified safe house. The government couldn't protect them. The law couldn't protect them. The only person who could protect them was standing in front of her, holding their sleeping daughter, offering to take them into darkness so complete that even enemies with unlimited resources couldn't find them. How long? She asked. How long would we have to hide? Years, maybe forever. Minjun's honesty was brutal, but appreciated. The Woshing Wo has long memory. They'll hunt us until they're satisfied we've paid for what we did today. Or until they're destroyed completely, Victoria said. The file's released. You said it yourself. This is the biggest organized crime investigation in history. How long can the Woshing Wo survive that kind of scrutiny? The organization might fall, Minjun acknowledged, but the people, the individual operators who've spent their lives in this world, they'll survive. They'll scatter, rebrand, rebuild. And some of them will remember that we're the ones who destroyed their empire. So we run forever. Or we end it. Minjun's expression shifted, becoming something harder, more dangerous. We don't just hide, we hunt. We find every person who poses a threat to our family and we eliminate them. One by one, if necessary, until no one is left who wants revenge badly enough to risk coming after us. Morrison held up a hand. I can't be hearing this. You're talking about systematic murder. I'm talking about self-defense, Minjun corrected. Preemptive self-defense. These people have already tried to kill us twice. They've kidnapped our daughter. They've burned down buildings with us inside. At what point does it become acceptable to fight back? When you're working with law enforcement under proper oversight, with legal authority, which takes years and assumes they don't kill us first. Minjun turned to Victoria, ignoring Morrison completely. I'm offering you a choice. We can stay, trust the system, hope that witness protection works better than it did for the last 6 witnesses who got killed while under federal supervision. Or we can disappear, live in shadows, and systematically eliminate every threat until our daughter can grow up without looking over her shoulder. Victoria looked at Lucia, peaceful in her father's arms. 2 years old, and already she'd been through more trauma than most people experienced in a lifetime. Kidnapped, held hostage, used as leverage by killers. If they stayed in the system, followed the rules, trusted the authorities, would it be enough? Or would she spend the rest of her life waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the day when protection failed and someone got through to finish what the Woshing Wo had started? I want my daughter to have a real life, Victoria said slowly. Not just existence, but life. I want her to go to school without bodyguards. I want her to make friends without background checks. I want her to grow up free. She met Minjun's eyes. If that means living in shadows for a few years while you make sure no one is coming after us, then that's what we do. Victoria, Morrison tried again. If you leave federal protection, I can't help you. If something happens, then we'll handle it ourselves, Victoria said. We've been handling things ourselves since this started. You've been helpful, Agent Morrison, but you can't protect us from people who've already penetrated your security. We have to protect ourselves. Morrison's jaw tightened, and for a moment Victoria thought he might try to stop them by force. But then his shoulders sagged slightly, acceptance settling in. At least take this. He pulled a card from his wallet. Not an official FBI card, but something handwritten. Personal cell phone, encrypted. If you need help, if things go sideways, you call that number, day or night, and I'll do what I can. Minjun took the card, studying it before nodding. Thank you for your discretion, if nothing else. I'm going to report that you escaped, Morrison said. Give you a 2-hour head start before the alarm goes out. After that, you're officially fugitives, and I'll have to pursue you like any other suspects. Understood. 2 hours is more than enough. What followed was controlled chaos. Victor and Jay, who'd been waiting in a secondary location, were contacted with coded messages. Equipment was gathered. Weapons, cash, fake identification documents that Minjun had apparently maintained for exactly this kind of emergency. Lucia was dressed in warm clothes, still mostly asleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. "What about David?" Victoria asked, remembering her ex-husband still recovering in the clinic's intensive care unit. "He stays," Minjun said without hesitation. "He's federal custody now. Morrison can use him for whatever prosecution he's building. We're done with David Chen." Victoria nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure. 3 years ago, David had controlled her life through fear and violence. Now he was unconscious in a hospital bed, under arrest, his entire organization crumbling around him. She'd spent so long running from him, and now she was walking away without a backward glance. They left through a service entrance, Jay waiting with an unremarkable sedan that would blend into traffic. Victor drove separately, creating a diversion that would pull attention if anyone was watching. Minjun climbed into the back seat with Victoria and Lucia, his body positioned to shield them from any potential threat. "Where are we going?" Victoria asked as Jay pulled into late-night Manhattan traffic. "Airport. Private terminal. I have a plane waiting." Minjun was already on his phone, making arrangements in rapid Korean. "We'll be in Seoul by tomorrow evening. From there, we disappear into Asia. Someplace the Woshing Wo has less influence than they do here." "Asia?" Victoria blinked. "But won't that be more dangerous?" "That's their territory. Which is exactly why they won't expect us to go there. And I have resources in Seoul, people who owe me favors, safe houses that exist completely off any grid." Minjun's hand found hers. "Trust me, Victoria. I've been planning for this possibility since the day we got married. I always knew it might come to running." She did trust him, had to trust him, because the alternative was staying in a system that had already been compromised, waiting for the next assassination attempt. The drive to the airport took 45 minutes, every second of which Victoria spent watching for pursuit. But the streets remained clear, and Jay navigated through the city with the same efficient calm he brought to everything. The private terminal was exactly what she'd expected: discreet, expensive, catering to people who needed to travel without commercial airline oversight. Minjun's plane was waiting, a sleek citation that looked like it cost more than most people's houses. The pilot, a woman in her 40s with the same professional detachment as Jay, nodded when she saw them. "Mr. Kang, we're fueled and ready. Seoul?" "Seoul," Minjun confirmed. "Direct flight, no stops." They boarded quickly, Victoria carrying Lucia, while Minjun moved more slowly, his injuries clearly paining him despite the medication. The interior was luxurious in the way that came from actual money rather than pretense. Leather seats, polished wood, every surface designed for comfort during long flights. Lucia woke as they settled in, looking around with wide eyes. "Where are we going?" "On an adventure," Victoria said, buckling her into a seat, "to a place very far away." "Will there be gardens?" Lucia asked, remembering Minjun's promise from earlier. "The most beautiful gardens you've ever seen," Minjun said, "with cherry blossoms and koi ponds and bridges over streams. You'll love it. And Daddy come too? And Mommy?" "We'll all be together," Victoria promised. "Always." The plane lifted off just as Morrison's 2-hour grace period expired. Victoria watched New York disappear beneath them, the city lights becoming a glittering carpet that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere down there, FBI agents were realizing their witnesses had fled. Somewhere, the remnants of the Woshing Wo were regrouping, planning revenge. Somewhere, the normal world continued on, unaware that 3 people had just vanished into darkness. Minjun's hand found hers, his grip warm despite the exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Sleep," he said quietly. "We have 14 hours before we land. You should rest while you can." "What about you?" "I'll rest when we're safe, when I know no one is coming through that door with weapons." His smile was tired but genuine. "Old habits. I've survived this long by staying alert when others would relax." "Minjun." Victoria waited until he looked at her. "This life you're offering, hiding, running, eliminating threats, is that what you want?" Is that the future you imagined? He was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. I imagined a lot of things. Empire, power, respect earned through fear. I imagined being untouchable, unbeatable. He looked at Lucia, sleeping peacefully in her seat. I didn't imagine her. Didn't imagine you. Didn't imagine that I could want something as simple as safety for people I love. So we're doing this, really doing this, disappearing into Asia to hunt down our enemies one by one until no one is left who wants us dead. Not quite so dramatic, Minjun said with a slight smile. We're establishing ourselves somewhere safe, building new identities and dealing with threats as they arise. Most of the Woxing Wo will be too busy surviving the law enforcement crackdown to worry about us. The ones who aren't, he shrugged, we'll handle them. And if we can't, if there are too many, or they're too well protected, or we're not as good at this as you think we are, then we run again, and again, as many times as necessary. Minjun's expression was absolutely serious. I will spend the rest of my life running if that's what it takes to keep you and Lucia safe. I will never stop, never surrender, never quit. They will have to kill me to stop me from protecting you. That's what I'm afraid of, Victoria whispered, that you'll sacrifice yourself for us. That one day you'll make the calculation that your death buys our safety, and you'll do it without hesitation. Then we'll have to make sure I never face that choice. Minjun pulled her closer, mindful of his injuries but needing the contact. We survived together, Victoria, all three of us. That's the promise I'm making, not just to you, but to myself. I didn't survive that explosion, didn't crawl through a burning building, didn't fight my way back to you just to die in some future confrontation. I survived because I have something to live for. Victoria rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him beneath the lingering smell of smoke and antiseptic. I love you, she said simply, and I'm terrified of this future we're choosing. But I love you, and I trust you, and if you say we can do this, then I believe you. I say we can do this, Minjun confirmed. Not easily, not without cost, but we can do it. We can build a life in the shadows where Lucia grows up loved and protected. We can eliminate the threats one by one. We can be a family, even if it's a family that has to hide. They flew through the night, leaving America behind. Victoria dozed fitfully, waking every time the plane hit turbulence or Lucia stirred. Minjun didn't sleep at all, his eyes constantly scanning the cabin, his mind clearly working through scenarios and contingencies. As dawn broke over the Pacific, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold, Lucia woke properly for the first time. She looked around the plane with a child's easy adaptability, accepting this new reality without question. "Daddy," she said, "are we running away?" The question was so perceptive that both Victoria and Minjun froze. How did you explain to a 2-year-old that yes, they were running, but it was to keep her safe? How did you make her understand without terrifying her? "We're going somewhere new," Minjun said finally. "Somewhere the bad people can't find us. Is that okay?" Lucia considered this with a seriousness that seemed beyond her years. "Will there still be bad people?" "Maybe, probably, but Daddy will keep you safe from them. That's my job, keeping you and Mommy safe." "And I help," Lucia announced. "I be very quiet when you say be quiet. I hide when you say hide. I be good helper." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Her daughter shouldn't have to think about hiding, about being quiet to avoid danger, about helping to evade bad people. She should be worrying about toys and cartoons and whether she could have dessert. But this was the reality they'd created, and Lucia would have to learn to navigate it. "You are a very good helper," Victoria said, pulling her daughter close. "The best helper in the whole world." They landed in Seoul as the sun set, the city sprawling beneath them in a sea of lights. Minjun had made calls during the flight, and a car was waiting at the private terminal. Not Jay this time, but another of his people, a young Korean woman who introduced herself simply as Sun and drove with the same efficient competence as everyone in Minjun's network. The safe house was in Gangnam, ironically in one of the most expensive, most visible parts of the city. "Hide in plain sight," Minjun explained. No one expects fugitives to live in luxury apartments surrounded by businessmen and celebrities. The apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furnishings that managed to be both comfortable and elegant, and most importantly, security that rivaled military installations, biometric locks, reinforced walls, panic room hidden behind what looked like a normal closet. "How long have you had this place?" Victoria asked, watching Lucia explore with the enthusiasm of a child who'd been cooped up in cars and planes for too long. 5 years. I bought it under a shell company when I first started expanding operations into Korea. Kept it maintained but mostly empty, just in case I ever needed somewhere to disappear. Minjun moved to the windows, looking out over Seoul. "I never thought I'd actually use it. Never thought I'd need to. And now we're here. Now we're here." He turned to face her. "Victoria, I need you to understand what the next few months will look like. We stay in this apartment. We don't go out except when absolutely necessary. We homeschool Lucia. We live like we're under siege because we are. For how long? Until I've identified and neutralized every significant threat. Until the Woshingwo has either forgotten about us or been scattered too far to mount an effective response." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "It won't be forever, but it will be hard. Harder than anything we've done so far. We've survived assassination attempts, building explosions, and international criminal conspiracies," Victoria said. "I think we can handle being cooped up in a luxury apartment for a few months." Minjun smiled, and for the first time in days it looked genuine. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for when we first met. You know that? I learned from the best." Victoria kissed him gently, mindful of his injuries. "And now I'm going to use those lessons to help you keep our family safe. So tell me, what's the plan? How do we identify the threats?" What followed was a crash course in the kind of intelligence work Minjun had been doing for years. Monitoring communications networks for mentions of their names. Tracking the movements of known Woshingwo associates. Identifying which members of the organization had survived the law enforcement crackdown and which were in custody. Building a target list of people who posed the most significant danger. It was meticulous, methodical work that took weeks. Victoria helped where she could, her nursing background, giving her unexpected skills in assessing medical records and hospital admissions, useful for tracking wounded criminals trying to stay off official radar. Lucia adjusted with the resilience of a child. She learned to play quietly when Daddy was working. She learned that the apartment was their whole world for now, that outside was dangerous, that someday they'd have that garden with cherry blossoms, but not yet. She learned and adapted, and somehow remained the bright, curious, loving child she'd always been. 3 months into their self-imposed exile, Minjun's intelligence network bore fruit. 6 high-ranking Woshingwo members had survived the initial crackdown and disappeared. 4 of them had already been tracked down by various law enforcement agencies. The remaining 2, a woman named Li Mei, who specialized in financial operations, and a man named Chen Wei's nephew, Chen Zhao, who'd sworn a blood oath of revenge against everyone who destroyed his family's legacy, were still at large. "Li Mei isn't the problem," Minjun said, studying her file. "She's pragmatic, focused on money rather than honor. She'll rebuild quietly somewhere else, probably under a new identity. She won't waste resources on revenge. But Chen Zhao will." Chen Zhao is 28 years old, ambitious, angry, and has nothing left to lose. His entire family was either arrested or killed in the crackdown. His fortune was seized. His reputation was destroyed. Minjun pulled up a photo, a young man with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. "He blames us specifically, has been posting on dark web forums about how he'll make us pay, offering bounties for information about our location. Has anyone claimed the bounty?" 3 people tried. All 3 are now dead. Chen Zhao doesn't pay debts. He eliminates people who know too much. Minjun zoomed in on the photo. "He's in Southeast Asia somewhere. Thailand, maybe Vietnam. My people are tracking him, but he's smart enough to move frequently." "So what do we do?" Minjun's expression went cold. "We stop waiting for him to find us. We find him first, and we end the threat permanently." Victoria should have been horrified, should have protested that they couldn't just murder someone, even someone who wanted them dead. But 3 months of living under siege had changed her. 3 months of watching Lucia ask when they could go outside, when they could have friends, when life would be normal again. 3 months of knowing that as long as Chen Zhao lived, they'd never be truly safe. How? She asked simply. I have contacts in Thailand, people who can locate him, confirm his position. Then I go in, alone, and I handle it. Not alone, Victoria said. We do this together. Victoria, you said it yourself. We survive together, all three of us. That means we do this together too. She met his eyes steadily. Besides, you'll need someone to watch your back. Your injuries still aren't fully healed. It took another week to get solid intelligence. Chen Zhao was in Bangkok, operating out of a nightclub he'd purchased under an assumed name. He kept 6 bodyguards, rotated his movements unpredictably, and only emerged at night. Taking him out would require precision, timing, and more than a little luck. They left Lucia with Sun, who'd proven trustworthy over the past 3 months. The little girl cried when they said goodbye, asking why Mommy and Daddy had to leave, when they'd be back. Soon, Victoria promised, holding her daughter tight. Very soon. And when we come back, we'll finally be able to go outside. To see the gardens I promised you. Really? Really? Victoria kissed her forehead. Be good for Sun. We'll be back before you know it. The flight to Bangkok took 4 hours. They spent the time going over the plan one final time. Chen Zhao's nightclub closed at 3 a.m. He typically left through a back entrance at 3:30 a.m., surrounded by his bodyguards. The alley behind the club was narrow, with limited sightlines and few cameras. It was the best opportunity they'd have. They positioned themselves in a building across from the alley at 2 a.m., watching through the scope of a rifle Minjun had acquired from local contacts. Victoria's job was simple. Watch the street, alert Minjun to any complications. His job was the difficult part. 3:30 a.m. came and went. No sign of Chen Zhao. He's running late, Minjun murmured, his eyes still pressed to the scope. Or he changed his routine. Should we abort? Not yet. Give it another 30 minutes. At 3:47 a.m., the back door of the club opened. 6 bodyguards emerged first, scanning the alley with professional thoroughness. Then Chen Zhao himself, younger in person than in his photos, dressed in expensive clothes that screamed new money. He was laughing at something, confident, unaware. Range? Victoria asked quietly. 200 meters. Wind is negligible. Clean shot. Minjun's finger moved to the trigger. Last chance to change your mind about this. Victoria thought about Lucia's face when she'd asked when life would be normal. Thought about the future they'd been promised. Gardens and schools and friends and normalcy. Thought about how none of that was possible while Chen Zhao lived and hunted them. Take the shot, she said. The rifle cracked once. Chen Zhao dropped like a puppet with cut strings, his bodyguards scattering in confusion. Minjun was already packing up the rifle, moving them toward the exit route they'd planned. By the time security cameras were checked and law enforcement arrived, they'd be gone. 2 more shadows in a city full of them. They flew back to Seoul the next morning, exhausted but relieved. The news reported Chen Zhao's death as gang violence, which wasn't entirely wrong. Law enforcement had no leads. The Woxingwo, already decimated by arrests and prosecutions, had no resources to investigate, and Victoria and Minjun, for the first time in months, felt like they could breathe. It's over, Victoria said as they walked back into their apartment where Lucia was waiting with Sun. It's really over. It's over, Minjun agreed. He looked at their daughter, at the life they'd fought so hard to protect. Li Mei isn't a threat. Chen Zhao is dead. The organization is scattered. We're finally safe. Does that mean we go outside now? Lucia asked hopefully. See the gardens? Minjun knelt down, pulling her into a hug. It means we go anywhere you want. Gardens, parks, maybe even a real house with a yard where you can play. And school? With other kids? And school with other kids, Victoria confirmed, joining the embrace. A normal life, just like we promised. They stayed in Seoul for another year, long enough to be certain no other threats would emerge. Long enough for Lucia to attend preschool and make friends and learn that the world could be safe. Long enough for Minjun's injuries to fully heal and for Victoria to return to nursing part-time at a local hospital. And then When they were ready, they moved. Not to Montana. That had been Morrison's plan, not theirs. Instead, they chose a small city in New Zealand, as far from the Woshing Wo's traditional territory as possible. They bought a house with a garden full of flowers. They enrolled Lucia in school under their new names, Daniel, Sarah, and Emma Park. A normal family with a boring backstory. Victoria worked at the local hospital. Minjun consulted for security firms, using his expertise legitimately for the first time in decades. Lucia grew up learning 2 languages, making friends, playing soccer, completely unaware of the violence that had marked her first years. On her 5th birthday, as they sang to her in their garden full of flowers, Victoria looked at Minjun and saw peace on his face. Not the dangerous calm that came from controlling violence, but actual peace. The kind that came from knowing your family was safe, that the threats were gone, that you'd finally earned the right to rest. "Worth it?" she asked quietly as Lucia blew out her candles. "Every second," Minjun said. "Every scar, every sleepless night, every moment of fear. Worth it to see her like this. And us?" He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "We survived, Victoria, against impossible odds. Against an entire criminal organization, against our own pasts. We survived and built something beautiful from the ashes. So no regrets?" "One," he admitted. "I regret that I didn't meet you sooner, that we wasted time hiding our feelings, pretending our marriage was just convenience, that we could have had more years like this." Victoria smiled. "Then we'd better make the most of the years we have left." They did. They built a life from the shadows they'd once inhabited. They raised their daughter with love and laughter, and the occasional warning to be careful, to be aware, to remember that the world could be dangerous. But mostly they let her be a child, let her believe in safety and goodness and futures uncomplicated by violence. And sometimes, late at night when Lucia was sleeping, Victoria would think about Richard Blackwood and his final gift, the documents that had destroyed an empire and bought their freedom. She'd think about David Chen, somewhere in witness protection, paying for his crimes. She'd think about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, terrified and running, and compare her to the woman she was now, strong, settled, safe. "Thank you," she'd whisper to the ghosts of her past, "for making me strong enough to survive, for teaching me that sometimes the only way out is through." And Minjun, always awake and watching over them, would pull her close and promise what he'd promised from the beginning. "I will always keep you safe. You and Lucia. Always." In their garden in New Zealand, surrounded by flowers and far from the violence that had forged them, Victoria Laurent, formerly Sarah Mitchell, briefly Mrs. Blackwood, now Sarah Park, finally believed him. They were safe, they were together, they were home, and that was enough. The end.